I'd like to call the August 13th meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Ms. Felico, if you'd call the roll, please.
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Mr. Maslin?
Here. Today we have matters of special privilege. Two members of the city staff will be receiving the Excellence of Service to Williamsburg Award. I'll meet you at the podium when I call your name. First, we have Jan Davison. Many of you who know Jan is a little stage shy, and I don't blame her for that. So we have Derek Green, who's going to step in and on her behalf to receive the award. Hi there. Doing fine. Why don't you come up here? So, for excellence in service to Williamsburg, real estate taxes make up nearly 1/3 of the city's total revenue. Therefore, the systems used to collect, analyze, and assess property fairly and equitably are extremely important. Ms. Davison has played a critical role in implementation of the city's cutting-edge property assessment software. She entered hundreds of pieces of code into the system, which were critical to the assessment process to move forward, all while being an absolute angel to work with. Aside from tax assessments, Mrs. Davison is an organizational and filing genius that can find any information from many years ago. She consistently gets her job done no matter what it takes and is still willing to take on additional roles to assist others in finance functions. We think the person who nominated Ms. Davison said it best with the statement, "I like to call her a gift to Williamsburg, and I hope everyone in the building gets to experience working with her because she's truly a treat." Ms. Davison is an exemplary city employee and is vital to the success of real estate development department. She is hereby recognized for her dedication to excellence in keeping with the best traditions of public service for the city of Williamsburg. So I'll give that to you, and if you'd like to, as our supervisor, like to make a comment on her behalf.
Sure. Jan, as you all know, is probably the most fantastic employee I've ever had the pleasure to serve with. So unfortunately, she was not able to come today, but she's very honored, and so am I. Thank you.
Next, we have Vicki Herrick. Come forward, please. Hello there. Everybody, this is Vicki Herrick, as you know. Vicki Herrick has faithfully and honorably served the citizens of Williamsburg for 22 years as Deputy Director of Finance. Ms. Herrick's leadership has been critical in the setup and implementation of the Tyler software. She has been involved in each phase of the implementation and with each department. Her expertise has ensured that the integrity of the system and the internal codes were maintained while making sure end users' needs were met. Ms. Herrick served the Williamsburg Regional Library for 8 years and currently serves on the Williamsburg Farmers Market Board. She has also served as interim finance director and did an outstanding job during her term. Thank you. Vicki's ability to plan, organize, and understand complex accounting standards and lead a team to accomplish major objectives truly enables her to be the glue that holds the finances together. Vicki Herrick is an exemplary employee and is vital to the success of the finance department. She is hereby recognized for her dedication and excellence in keeping with the best traditions of public service to the city of Williamsburg. Thank you very much.
I'm going to keep it brief, but no, it's an honor to be a city employee, and I thank God for giving me this job and the ability to do it every day. And I thank my staff. We have a very special, unique team down in finance, and I'm very fortunate that we work so well together and that they're just amazing. I'd also like to give a real quick shout out to Michele Wilson, because without her, we could not have done this ERP. And I've worked many hours. We've sweated, we've cried, we've we've gone through a lot, with this ERP system, and we still have a ways to go, but I just wanted to really thank her because I couldn't have done it without her.
Next item on the agenda is the council minutes. I'm sure everybody's had the chance to review them. Is there a motion?
If no one has any corrections or amendments, I move that council minutes of December 9th, 2019 be accepted.
Second.
Ms. Felica?
Are we doing them one at a time or?
Oh,
putting
no,
them all
yeah,
together?
I'm sorry.
The only one on here is listed as December, so.
No, the three of them.
I'm sorry. It's on a different thing. Oh, I see. February 11th, 2020 and February 13th, 2020. That's what I get for not putting my glasses on.
So that includes all
All
three
three
sets
of them,
minutes?
yes.
Okay. Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Next, we have public hearings. Item A is VAC number 20-001, request of Modern World LLC to vacate a portion of an alleyway at the rear of 410 Pocahontas Street. Ms. Murphy?
Yes. Mayor Pons and members of City Council, this is a request of Modern World LLC to vacate the portion of the unimproved alley behind their property at 410 Pocahontas Street as shown in red on the screen. The alley is 16 feet in width and runs behind the properties on the west side of Pocahontas Street and the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Vacations are subject to the state code, which requires an advertised public hearing. It also states that at the conclusion of the hearing, an application of any person, the governing body may appoint 3 to 5 people to view such right-of-way and report in writing any inconvenience that would result from discontinuing the right-of-way. Since access to other properties on the alley is available, staff recommends viewers not be appointed. City Council's practice is to sell paper streets or unused right-of-ways to adjoining property owners for 25% of the assessed value established by the city assessor. The city assessor has determined this portion of the alley is worth $1,900, resulting in an applicant's cost of $475 if council decides to vacate the alley. Staff's recommendation is to approve proposed ordinance number 20-11 to vacate a portion of the alley as outlined in Exhibit A, with the applicant paying the city $475 for this portion of the alley. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. I believe Mr. John Crawford, the owner, is here if you have any questions of him.
Do you have any questions for staff before we go to the public hearing? Thank you.
There to begin with.
The alley was with the original plat, which was back, I believe, 30s or 40s when it was originally platted. At that time, a lot of the alleys were for trash removal or access to the rear of the properties if they have garages and those types of things. It's really just a paper street that was left over from the original plat. We have a lot of those in the city, and we've vacated a bunch of them over time.
For all intents and purposes, it's really part of the person's backyard there. And
It looks like the person's backyard, especially at this location, because at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation property is a big, tall, black fence that designates where their property is. So in all intents and purposes, it looks like it's part of their backyard.
And as an alley, do we typically look to the adjacent property owner to do the maintenance on that?
It depends on what's in the alley. In some of these cases on this street, it looks like someone's backyard and they are maintaining it. In some other instances, it may be wooded and it's left part of the, looks like a wooded part of the lot. I think in a lot of cases, people look at them as part of their backyard and use it and cut the grass as part of their backyard.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have no questions. Very straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. With that, I'll open the public hearing to allow anybody from the audience who'd like to come forward to speak to this. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion.
Straightforward to me, no questions, no discussion.
It's fine with me.
Same with me?
Yeah, so I agree. I think, yeah, you know, it's certainly doesn't have any real value to the city in the future. And gosh, if some date in the future that Colonial Williamsburg wanted to develop their property for residential, whatever it may be, that they wouldn't need access to the Sallyway either. So I'd be happy to entertain a motion.
I move to approve proposed ordinance 20-11 with the applicant paying the city $475 for the unimproved alley adjacent to their property.
Second?
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Item B, under public hearings, resolution number 20-15, amending the general fund and public assistance fund budgets and establishing an emergency medical service, EMS, rates for the city of Williamsburg, Virginia for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021. Ms. Dameron?
Good afternoon. Yes, Resolution 20-15 seeks to appropriate some grant funding. It also requests to increase EMS fees and establish one new fee. So on June 5th, the city received $1.3 million in coronavirus relief funds. Of that amount, about $158,000 was spent in FY20, leaving $1,146,148 to be appropriated for spending in FY21. The city was also awarded a grant from the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development to cover emergency housing, rent, and food needs in the amount of $165,000. Periodically, the city increases rates for the emergency medical services, and this is done to help make sure that we get as much cost recovery as we can from Medicare and the insurance companies. The proposed rates that we're seeking to increase are all increases below 5%. They range from 4.4% to 4.8% in increases, and will put us level with what York County is currently charging and just slightly under what James City County is charging. And I believe, David, I don't think I'm wrong, that James City County is considering increasing their rates.
That's correct. It'll put us slightly above James City County, and they're looking at increasing theirs at the next year's
That's
time frame.
backwards.
Yes.
Thank you for correcting that. And then we're asking to implement a new rate and an oxygen usage fee. So I'd be glad to entertain any questions.
Vice Mayor Dent?
So, Ms. Dameron, thank you for the presentation. Could you just talk a little bit about the COVID funding and how that covers expenses? What qualifies under that for coverage?
Well, anything that is both necessary and reasonable to deal with a COVID crisis. So we can't replace our revenue streams. Any lost revenues that the city has, we cannot use it to replace that, but we can cover additional expenditures. We can also use it to reimburse the city for some salary and benefit expenses for people that were maybe redirected to deal with a crisis that otherwise would have been utilized in other positions.
Okay. One other question, and this may be for the chief. Have you estimated what the revenue would be from the generated with the cost of the new oxygen fee?
It was only like 10,000 or less, I think, was the estimation.
Okay, thank you.
Basil?
A couple questions. In terms of the COVID funding, in terms of what we're applying for, is there an audit anywhere? Does the federal government audit any of that?
It'll be part of our single audit that we do for any federal funds. And there are various guidelines out there for us to follow. For instance, I was just on a call where we were discussing guidelines for localities that are considering additional hazardous pay and what will qualify and things that we need to take into consideration to make sure that we don't apply for something that would not meet within those guidelines.
And if I may, the guidelines that have been provided are seemingly constantly being updated,
Yes.
added to, expanded. The one thing that is absolutely certain is that localities cannot use this money to replace revenues lost due to COVID-19. Other than that, they are leaving the door pretty open in terms of what you can do with the funding. And localities all over the region are doing all kinds of different things. One of the things that has made it complicated for us is that the initial announcement of funding that we received from the state indicated that we would get the funding, $1.3 million, in 2 lump sums. One component in June and one component to come later, but it wasn't really defined when that would be. Then, when June arrived, we actually received the entire lump sum of $1.3 million. And so we figured that that was the end of the COVID-19 relief. And then it's only been a month or so now since the governor announced another release of COVID-19 funds, $1.3 million, which we've applied for, but I don't think we have received yet.
We have not received it.
And so what you see as part of the packet today is just the programming for that first $1.3 million. And I use the word programming because much of that money is not spent yet.
So, Drew, following up on that, so do you anticipate any more waves coming after the second one?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to predict. Our consultant in Washington thinks that as part of what Congress is currently debating, there is a possibility additional funding will be pushed down to the state, just as this last group was, and then the state will have some discretion as to how to disperse it. You know, in Virginia, we've been very fortunate because the state of Virginia has been, I think, very forthcoming with the funding that they received from the federal government, whereas many states have not released a lot of funds to local governments. And the restriction, just to be very clear, the restriction on not using it to replace revenue is not imposed by the state of Virginia, it's imposed by the federal government. And so the anticipation is that if the state gets more money intended for local government relief, that it may not have that restriction. Because obviously that's been a rallying cry across the country, is that, you know, for local governments, one of our greatest needs is replacing revenue. And I think many view that as not providing relief directly to people who need it. But the reality is that us being able to replace our revenue means we have to apply less pressure on taxes to be collected. So I'm very hopeful that if more money does arrive, it comes without that restriction.
Thank you. Now, so one question on one of the line items there. Tell us about the mini ambulance, and does that have a lower reimbursement rate?
A lower reimbursement rate?
Yeah, so we're buying a mini ambulance?
Because it's a mini for the, I'll let David speak to that, or Chief Eagle speak to that.
Basically, it's what we use on special events and different things. Now we don't have a covered way of getting our responders or a patient out of the public. So you've seen them at special events. It looks like a small ambulance. It's like a Gator type vehicle that has all the capacity and capability of an ambulance, but it can be in places that you normally couldn't get an ambulance. So it could be used for special events. It could be used for locations where a normal ambulance couldn't have access to it. And it would allow us to separate someone who may have, to not only provide privacy, but to provide protection from the elements, as well as separate them from any kind of group or elements that they may be exposed to, as well as protect the responder and keep them out of just being in an open air type of Gator. It would provide them a climate controlled and protected apparatus. So it sounds like a novelty, but you see them in many areas in places where a normal apparatus would not be able to go, whether it be for crowds or terrain or whatever the reason may be.
And then going back to the rates, could you explain to the public, at what point is the distinction made between, this is going to be a BLS or an ALS2 or an ALS1? And also explain to the public that there may be times when our medic units are tied up and a James City County or York County medic unit shows up and they would be paying their rates. Is that correct?
Correct, yes, but none of it is hard bill. Everything is what we call a soft bill, so it's whatever the allowable charge of Medicare or the insurance company is what we collect. So Medicare publishes what their allowable rates are, and then we go a little bit higher than that so that we can recover what insurance will pay. And the level of care that we give is what determines which level they're charged. So ALS is an advanced life support measure. ALS2 is when medications and different things are being provided. BLS is just a basic level of care that may involve a transport, but you're not utilizing those special skills that a paramedic may have. And then they also, Medicare allows, as well as insurance, allows a per mile charge based on how far you travel, I think is how that works. And so whatever agency is picking you up is what you are charged, but it's whatever the Medicare or Medicaid or insurance allows, and then the rest is kind of, we'll ask for it, but if you're unable to pay that, or if you're a citizen of our community, then we don't ask for a copay or anything like that. So it's what those agencies will pay.
Okay, thank you.
I just had one question as regards to the CARES funding. Is there a certain time by which this needs to be spent?
Yes, it has to be spent by the end of December.
Okay. And as far as the rates, I think it's prudent to keep pace with expenses and what our neighboring jurisdictions are doing. So I'm in favor of the practice to do so. Thank you.
On the rates, Barbara, besides being slightly below York County and soon to be below James City once they raise theirs, I just want to clarify, we have not raised our rates since 2017.
We have not raised them since 2017, and we will be equal if our proposed rates are approved. We'll be level with York County, and we'll be just slightly above where James City County is currently.
Then I'm in agreement as well with maintaining our position in the historic triangle.
There's no other questions. I'll open the floor for public hearing. If anybody would like to come forward and speak to this matter. Dr. Cranbill?
Cranbill, 201 Harrison. I just have a quick question which doesn't have to be answered, but I think it would be good because I've thought about it. Let's assume something happens to any one of us and we want to know which hospital we're going to. Is there a system, or shouldn't we have a system that we could notify the right people that this is the hospital we want to go to if something happens to us? And I don't want to create a discussion out of order, but I think that'd be very useful. I'd like to know that I could fill something out for my wife and I, and we know where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe the chief can follow up after the meeting with Dr. Cranbill to speak to that. Not now, though. Okay. If anybody else like to come forward? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for motion.
I motion the approval of Resolution 20-15 in order to appropriate coronavirus relief funds to Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development grant funds and to approve the EMS rate schedule.
Second.
Ms. Felico?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
And Mayor, just so you know, we will be coming back to council for that second wave of CARES Act funding, the second $1.3 million with a similar appropriation. We're currently internally talking about ways that we can use that to help the community. One of the things that makes it a little bit challenging is Mr. Maslin's question about, do we expect any more? And so what we're trying to do is be careful with that money, not to overcommit it, because issues could come up between now and the end of December, which is the time limit on spending the money. And we want to be prepared to address those if they do. So we're sort of slow playing it a little bit.
Well, it is a lot of money to spend in
It is.
essentially a short period of time. And
That's
so,
right.
one might think if you get money, it's easy to spend, but I think given the guidelines, it's a little tougher than you would imagine. Okay, so that takes us to reports, monthly financial statement. Cameron?
Yes, I'll ask Barbara to come forward and she can talk a little bit about it. You know, one of the things that hopefully you noticed about the report is in July, it's very hard to do a financial report because so much is fluid still. It's the first month of the year. You've got a lot of expenses that come in under July that then get appropriated back to June to close out the fiscal year, which we will do next month. So next month's report will be a little bit easier to read and better to correlate, but we did the best that we could with what we had. Barbara?
Yes, what I'd like to do is start with the COVID-19 update because that explains a lot about what you're going to see on the July report. And this first slide is an updated slide from what I showed for June in July. And in July, the positive revenue variance was at $2.1 million from our projection. And this slide shows that variance at $2.2 million, and the increase is $108,000 that we received in sales tax for education. And then the expenditure, the positive expenditure variance that I showed in July was $800,000 positive variance, meaning that we were under what we had projected our expenditures would be by $800,000. And this slide is showing that we're, our positive variance has been reduced to $582,000. That's basically $198,000 in invoices that we've paid that relate back to fiscal 20. We will continue to pay invoices up until the end of this month and we will accrue them back to June if they relate to that time period. So this next slide shows some of the adjustments that we've had from in July. So the lodging tax and the meals tax that we received in July are really activity related to June. So in the closing process, we just have not made that accrual back to that month. So that $50,000 and $338,000 will be accrued back to June. And just for a point of reference, the $50,330 in lodging is about 15% of what we received in June of 19. So if you recall, our projection was for 20%, so this is about 5% less. However, on the meals tax, the $338,687 is about 47% of what we received in June of 19. And while that's not great, it is about 27% better than what our worst case projection was. And then we received some more funds in business and professional occupational licenses. And then in our other revenue streams, we had about $33,820 at this point that will be accrued back to June. So that's a total revenues of $449,930 that will be accrued back to June. And in our expenditures, we have $429,000 that I know of that are payroll expenses that really belong in the previous year. We could have a few more invoices come in, as I mentioned. We will continue to review those. And so that brings us to a slide that updates that first slide I showed you for June, taking into account these entries that I'm aware of. And what that does is our positive revenue variance increases to $2.7 million, where our positive variance for expenditures decreases to $153,000. Now, at the end of the day, we're relatively level, only slightly better off by about $20,800. So the first slide showed a revised deficit of $1.4 million, and we're still basically at $1.4 million estimated deficit at this point. And that brings us to, once those adjustments are made, what July looks like. And so we really only have revenues that were categorized as other revenues. And the difference between the 477 or 78,000 projected versus the 522,000 are some delinquent taxes that we received that were not included in our projection. Other than that, relating to the July report, I will note that the lodging tax that we received in July for June, the $2 lodging tax that we pick up in tourism, was about 23.6% compared to what it was the previous July that was for June. And other than that, we will continue to monitor and watch closely our revenues as we move forward. It'll be later this month before we have the lodging that's for July and meals for July. And it will be September before we have our sales tax information. But we will keep a close eye on that, particularly monitoring how things are coming in regards to how we project it. Go ahead, Tim.
Have any questions for Ms. Dameron?
Ms. Dameron and maybe Mr. Trivette, with the moving back into phase, does that change what your worst case scenario projection may be for 21? And also one thing that when you look at, not only did we move back into phase, but right after City Council approved to continue the outdoor seating, we hit this period of 112 heat index where I'm sure not many people were comfortable eating outside. So another thing that's come about in 2020 that's having an impact on specifically the meals. But I was just wondering, I know it's early in the year, but if you thought
That's a good question.
that may change the worst case scenario projection based on that we're not moving forward as we thought we might be.
That's a really good question. Mayor Pons had asked me that a couple of days ago, a similar question. And so, I'll break it down into two pieces because that's sort of how we structured our response to COVID-19. The past fiscal year, which is sort of what we're showing the numbers of here, and then the current fiscal year. So for the past fiscal year, which is what we're still looking at in terms of closing out the year and wrapping it up, we had projected a $4.2 million deficit. And what Ms. Dameron is saying is right now, which could change, of course, as we close it out, we're running at about 1.3. So that's a pretty decent amount of coverage in case something were to happen. It's unlikely that'll happen, though, at least to that degree. What we more focus on is the current fiscal year. And so when we put together our worst-case projections for FY21, we were particularly careful to say that we counted on COVID-19 mitigation impacting revenues into the fall. And so September, October timeframe for mitigation measures to still be in place. If we get to the end of October and we're still limited on gatherings and eating inside, then we need to start thinking about what we might want to adjust. Because what our whole year is based on is that those mitigation measures will end in October so that the normal economic activity can start to recover. And so what we did is we built from October forward a gradual increase in revenues in each one of the line items for revenue. But now looking back at actual experience, what we have seen is that sales tax and meals tax did not perform as badly as we had projected. And lodging performed worse than we had projected. Not by a tremendous amount, but by enough that there might be some offset there. So when we get to October's end, if we're still in the mitigation period, then we may need to refine some of those numbers for FY21. But we're optimistic in that the meals and sales tax has sort of outperformed expectations, and that might be able to offset this unexpected loss from lodging. But I think that the long-term recovery is the danger, right? The longer we're in mitigation, the longer it's going to be for us to get back to normal.
Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
One, Have we seen a positive trend in some of our months as compared to 2019 with meals and lodging taxes? You mentioned 47% and 23.6. Have those been trending upwards at all?
Well, I wouldn't say when you compare it to 19 that we're seeing a positive trend, but as Mr. Trivette mentioned, the meals and the sales tax are doing much better than we had projected in our worst case. Lodging, however, is doing worse than we projected. And so those are things that as we move forward, we'll be watching very closely to determine, do we have to make other adjustments in order to end fiscal 21 in as good a standing as we had projected.
Thank you.
Well, while the numbers are better than we projected being down, I think that's a good sign. It really is still daunting to consider the impact that COVID is having on our main industry of tourism, and particularly the plight of hotels. I wish I had an answer for them, but certainly we're all victim to waiting for COVID to released to go away or find a vaccine or something. I was interested that occupancy was higher than revenue would indicate. We're at 15% of last year's in revenue, but only 21% down, which means more people are staying, but the rates are lower in the facilities. So I don't have any questions, but so thank you, and let's keep our fingers crossed that we can bounce back quicker.
Well, and I think, Mayor, you bring up a good point, because we focus on the positive, of course, and the positive is that we're doing better than our worst-case projection. But we don't want to misstate that we're still looking at a sizable deficit at the end of the operating year, right? And almost to the exact amount that we normally have a surplus. And the difficulty there is that the surplus is often what funds the capital improvement plan. So that's where our concern is.
Okay, thank you. So that takes us to monthly department operating reports. Is there anything to point out or any questions for staff? You have them for your perusal. City manager's report?
None this month.
City attorney?
Not now. I have something later in the agenda.
So that leads us to unfinished business discussion and direction concerning the fire station project solicitation. I'll turn that over to Mr. Trivette, City Manager, David Eagle, Fire Chief. Just to kind of give us a rundown of where we are in the process,
Sure.
Given the conversation
Monday.
Allow council members to ask any additional questions, and I would probably ask Ms. Shelton to kind of talk about the PPEA process.
Sure. So since 2016, we've been pursuing a fire station project. It's been a long and interesting journey in terms of collecting information, presenting to City Council, deciding on a path. And since that time, the direction that was provided in 2019, our fire chief retired. We hired a new fire chief. We re-engaged on the project, completed the necessary programming for the Station 2 plan, and are now ready to issue the procurement, the solicitation. As you said, Mayor, it's intended to be a solicited PPEA proposal, which is just a slightly different variation on standard procurement. We think that'll be the best path forward. It'll give us the best opportunity for council input as we proceed through the solicitation process. So, I know today is not the only vote on what happens with the decision in terms of the fire station moving forward. It only defines what the procurement ends up being for. So as we move through the solicitation process, it will be, we looked at it today, it'll be at least at 3 opportunities where this will be back before City Council in some fashion, whether it's you meeting with prospective bidders to provide input on what you think the design of a fire station should be, all the way through to an actual formal vote on proceeding with procurement at 2 different points in the process. And I know Ms. Shelton can talk more about how the PPEA actually works.
So the PPEA is the Public-Private Educational Facility and Infrastructure Act. And it is just an alternative procurement process to design, build, bid, where we have a fixed project that's designed and we put it out and council gets a contract with the lowest bidder. In this case, it's a request for people to propose to design the project, and they submit those designs to City Council, and then City Council decides who they want to move forward with in terms of design to negotiate a contract. So at the point at which City Council decides who they want to move forward with of the proposers, then there's potentially two contracts. One is the interim contract where we're paying for the cost of the design up front, and then there is the construction contract or the final contract, which is the construction of the building from beginning to end. And so we've done this process before multiple times, the most recent one being this building. That was not a city-solicited PPEA, but council ended up moving forward with multiple bidders and decided to put the project out to multiple bidders as opposed to the original original project that council received. It's just a method by which someone outside can propose a project or City Council can propose a project, and it really gives council lots of input into the decision-making about what the building looks like and how it functions.
Thank you. Chief Eagle, did you have anything to offer before we begin? No, sir. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Mayor Dent, and then we'll go around the table and share some thoughts and perhaps end up at a conclusion.
Yeah, I don't have any additional questions. I think we, not from what we saw on Monday. Obviously, this is a huge decision when you're talking about a capital project that could involve $16 to $20 million or $13 to $15 million, but we have $14.5 million. So for me, I've sat down and tried to weigh all of the options. And so I started making a list of what is it that I know. So I know that a study was conducted. Mr. Trivett's touched on some of this, so just bear with me. A study was conducted in 2018, identified a need for a second fire station on Capitol Landing Road to address response times. That was the main driver of that location selection. And then in 2019, March, City Council approved construction of the second fire station and a renovation of the existing station for about $11.2 million. And move forward to June of 2020, as Mr. Trivette alluded to, this has been a lengthy process. So now we're June 2020, a new presentation is developed. It's a two-station model, rebuild the existing station and the EOC and construct a second station would cost of $16 to $20 million. The second plan is leave everything in one station, and that's a $13 to $15 million project. During the time, a carryover balance has been applied to the total. As I said, it's up to roughly $14.5 million. Monday, the new presentation obviously was presented to the publicly for the first time. So again, I'm not going to go back. We asked enough questions. We were here quite a while on Monday asking questions. But a couple of things that I don't know. The new presentation indicated that some of the modeling from the initial report was not accurate and may affect that station location that was originally selected. We didn't see that information or any new modeling. And then also with the additional funding that was available that's been added to the project, is there an opportunity to renovate, to expand the renovation of the existing station and still take advantage of the second station solution? As the fire chief presented from one portion of the study, that the study recommended for Williamsburg and its layout, if we wanted to provide adequate response times equally to all communities in Williamsburg, we would need 3 fire stations. I think obviously we're not in a position to fund 3 fire stations, but I certainly think that there's an opportunity for us to start addressing response times by adding a second station and looking at a renovation of the existing station. I'm very, very familiar with the station, so I know the men and women that work in that building need something done to that building. So I think we miss out if we invest all of the money in one facility, that we lose that opportunities to start addressing the problem of response times that was identified in the study. So for me, at the end of the day, I started looking at I broke it down to two things. One is response times to improve coverage in the northeast portion of the city. There's two critical factors: response times and renovation of the rebuilding of the existing station. So you have, between those two critical priorities, for me, I have to select one of those. And for me, the most important priority remains the response times. And I respect that, people in the community, or maybe even my city council colleagues, their priority may be different. But for me, my priority remains the response times. And there's a lot of at stake here with spending this amount of money on a capital project. And right now, I support the second station solution, but I also came prepared today to support, if city council colleagues elected to do so, that we delay any decision today and allow the community additional time to provide input based on a presentation that they just saw on Monday, and making a decision of that magnitude for city council. And regardless of what decision is reached today, I'll support the outcome, and whichever one of those priorities is not selected that I've identified for me, I'll continue to make policy decisions that supports the one that's not included. If they're both included, that's awesome, but if one of the others not included, I'll continue to make decisions that support the other part of my two critical factors. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Maslin?
I agree with the Vice Mayor that it's necessary to delay any vote for at least a month to actually have a public engagement process on this. This is a significant project, and trying to rush it through, I think, is a mistake. From a public process standpoint, we should allow the community time to understand that staff is requesting that City Council not move forward with previously approved $11.2 million project to build Fire Station 2 on Capitol Landing Road and provide significant facility improvements to existing fire station. The public needs to understand that City Council is being asked to spend more money on a project which no longer provides community benefit of reduced response time throughout the whole community. The public needs to understand that City Council is being asked to spend more money on a project which no longer provides an economic development boost to the Capitol Landing corridor. The public may find it ironic that city staff gave a 30-day notice for the public hearing today to discuss raising user rates for medic unit service, yet for a significant capital facilities project with projected costs of $14+ million, city staff offers no public outreach process and wants to force a city council vote within 4 days of a somewhat misleading, inaccurate, and half-baked presentation. Think of all the public outreach for the GIOs. What about the comp plan public outreach, which is now going into its second year? So what are examples of how the public may have been misled or received inaccurate information? The agenda item summary gives the impression that staff is merely updating the progress on the $11.2 million two-station project approved 17 months ago by City Council. Nothing can be further from the truth. Not only is that project more than a year behind schedule, one can question whether staff ever had any intent to accomplish it. Rather, they prefer only to rebuild the existing fire station with a new building in the current location and have created a presentation which inflates the program requirements and costs substantially over what they presented last year for both a two-station and a single-station project. Remember, the proposed cost of the two-station solution is $11.2 million. It is already budgeted and includes $5.2 million for facility upgrades to Fire Station 1. On Monday, the consultant confirmed that this budget, the $5.2 million, covers the facility deficiencies at the Fire Station 1, but misspoke by stating that there would be no increase in square footage for Fire Station 1. However, when examining the consultant's 2019 existing station upgrade budget spreadsheet, which, by the way, was conveniently omitted from the Monday presentation, we see that that budget includes an addition of 2,075 square feet, renovation of personnel area, 5,830 square feet, and renovation of west area, 2,160 square feet. To put this 2,075 square foot addition in perspective, when we opened the current fire station, we had a second fire station on Ironbound Road, which was about the same size. It included apparatus bays, living quarters, and training space. Yet staff's agenda item summary characterizes the $5.24 million improvements to the existing fire station as a minor renovation. To recap, for $11.2 million, not only do we get an addition to the existing fire station the size of the former Fire Station 2, but we gain a new 3-bay Fire Station 2, which meets our necessary program requirements as opposed to piling on nice-to-have program wishes. For example, any community our size would be glad to have our current 24-seat Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. We have seen no data-based evidence presented that the EOC needs to be doubled in size, which would require tearing down this building addition that was just built 11 years ago. As we heard on Monday, during our most recent EOC activation, only 25% of the seats were needed, and EOC operations are now able to leverage virtual participation. By the way, according to the governor, this recent storm generated a record number of tornado alerts within the Commonwealth. Using additional time to prepare a side-by-side comparison of the new proposal against the City Council's previously approved $11.2 million project will allow the public to accurately compare the alternatives. How much more misled can the public be than the caption in Virginia Gazette's article yesterday, which says, on Monday, City Council heard a report that a new fire station and the necessary improvements to the outdated existing station could cost more than $20 million. No, the new station and the necessary improvements to the outdated existing station would cost $11.2 million, according to the consultant's presentation last year. Furthermore, a more transparent presentation would not inflate the cost of the two-station project and then say that the new proposal would save $3.6 to $4.4 million by spending $13 to $18.5 million. When the $11.2 million proposed project approved 17 months ago is a good solution. In addition, staff's presentation ignores the benefits of building Fire Station 2 as an enabling project for improvements to Fire Station 1. These benefits include freeing up 50% of the area on the apparatus floor. So by building Fire Station 2, we're putting 3 bays there. The current fire station has 6 bays. Once Fire Station 2 is completed, we'll have 3 empty bays in the current fire station. It also reduces the staff on each shift by up to 30% in the Fire Station 1. In addition to alleviating some of the overcrowding in Fire Station 1, having 2 stations greatly assists with social distancing and mitigates the risk of having the entire operation compromised by an incident in the one station. We actually saw that happen 3 years ago when the roof HVAC unit fire shut down much of the station. Furthermore, any space built in Fire Station 2 saves what space needs to be built out in Fire Station 1. That illustrates the fallacy of rebuilding Fire Station 1 and saying that we can build Fire Station 2 later. Because in that scenario, you have to build into the first project much of the program space that would be needed later for Fire Station 2. On Monday, we discussed sleep deprivation as a problem in the current station, especially because for every call, the entire station goes into alarm. So another benefit to our firefighters and paramedics is that with 2 stations, only the station receiving the call would receive the alarm. So what part of Monday's presentation appears to be half-baked? The plan for temporary facilities was added at the last minute and could use additional time to work out many of the details. To ensure that any fatal flaws are flushed out of this part of the project, helpful details might include changing third floor attic space in the municipal building to sleeping quarters needs a comprehensive building code check. Although it might be cost effective to have the firefighters build their own partitions to subdivide this area into dorm rooms, the HVAC systems and fire sprinkler systems may need to be modified, even if the dorm rooms will not have any ceilings. There seems to be uncertainty concerning the location of a temporary EOC. The presentation shows that it's in the 3rd floor of the municipal building, while during our tour on Monday, we were told it would be located in this building, right over there. The most important space in a fire station is the kitchen and eating area. From the consultant's report, we see that all the equipment in the existing one, Because this is a commercial kitchen, there are significant building and health department regulations which need to be addressed if the shop break room is to be used for that. Not all of those details seem to have been studied yet. It is ironic that of all the components in the proposed project, that the temporary facilities budget is fixed as $150,000 without any cost range, when it may have the greatest number of details to work out. In addition, staff needs to finalize a plan for where city vehicles will be repaired during the up to 18-month time period when Public Works is displaced from the shop area. We want to thank all the first responders who support building Fire Station 2 and have helped to give a voice to our communities in that area. Coincidentally, I received a call from a contractor yesterday who had recently retired as a career firefighter paramedic in the area. After giving me an update on his project, he commented that he had responded to many fires on that side of town and was glad that York County had a fire station nearby. His concern was that in York County, if the York County Fire Station was tied up on one of their calls, that the time delay in responding from our current station might not be soon enough. In closing, the need for public engagement seems to be of more importance for this project than many of our efforts, especially when on Monday there was a warning from the dais that the actions taken related to these discussions could lead to 10% increase in the real estate tax. Thank you.
Before I go to you, Ms. Ramsey, I just, to accuse the staff and the professionals of providing us with misinformation or misleading us with half-baked reports, I think is extremely insulting, and I certainly don't subscribe to that. Chief Eagle is a 35-year veteran, maybe longer, I don't know, of the police department. Guernsey Tingle is a well-respected architectural firm that's made a recommendation. Stewart Cooper Knowles is a well-respected engineering planning firm for fire departments. And to say that those folks are misleading us with half-baked data and information, I think is an embarrassment to this body.
So I, too, have a few comments. I would like to start off by appreciating the comments that came from those who spoke on Monday, have called me, or submitted emails to City Council. In fact, an excerpt from Toby Lane, who lives on Yorkshire, helped put this discussion back into perspective for me. He said, and I imagine many of us, are not particularly curious about how many people are on a unit, how long it takes to walk to a unit, or how many bays or square feet there are, and unsure why we, City Council, would be either, as it mostly leads to second-guessing highly paid consultants and experienced employees. His point of view is that we need to be sure we are not spending outside of what we have available. It was a reminder to me that our job is to deliberate and determine what we believe is the best path forward for the city in regards to policy, and to leave the operational details such as temporary facilities, configuration of personnel equipment, to our chief and his qualified staff and the hired consultants who have been involved in actually constructing fire stations. Yes, last year, 2019, I voted for a second station to be built on Capitol Landing Road and that Station 1 be renovated. However, as discussed on Monday and as what I have witnessed over the past year, particularly in the past few months, there have been many factors influencing my decision. And some of these are call volume and the increased construction and population growth in Midtown Road, address points, which impacted the response times, revenues for staffing and operations, and additional data which, as I say, have caused me to reconsider this decision. Included as a factor none of us could have foreseen, COVID-19 and its impact on our revenue. As I have learned more about the deficiencies of our fire station, I recognize the value in completely rebuilding the central station instead of renovating it. A new station will be more cost and building efficient with the latest materials, equipment, and systems, with spaces to accommodate the needs of a 21st century fire department and for its members. I appreciate that the EOC is 11 years old, but as advised, the entire building must be demolished to meet the standards for the rest of the building and provide a complete top-notch facility crucial to the health, safety, and best performance of the fire staff. The proposed new EOC will provide a flexible, multifunctional space for training, conferences, and meeting area for the volunteers. The staffing concerns for the second fire station had not been included in the construction amounts that we had previously considered. A new building as opposed to a renovation is evident from the current Stryker building where we sit with the old one was torn down and this one in its place. We have the funding to construct such a state-of-the-art fire station and think this should be our top priority, as we emphatically know a new station number 1 is required and now. I see no reason for an additional study or further delay. Another resident of Williamsburg, Gary Plagg, from Brandywine, emailed council that he is not in favor of City Council committing Williamsburg to more funding than is currently available and approved for the fire station project. His question was, would it be possible to demolish and reconstruct Station 1 now and hold off on Station 2 for a couple of years until we know that we are in a less precarious and unsure, unstable economic situation? We are all concerned with the economic repercussions of the pandemic and the uncertainty to our revenue. A decision to delay construction of a station number 2 on Capitol Landing Road, in my view, does not diminish or change the improvements planned for the Northeast Triangle, which will benefit all residents in that area and help attract commerce. In fact, we may be able to get some of those back on track sooner. Included are the demolition of the DMV, the streetscape, the infrastructure, and possibly a redo of the visitor center that Colonial Williamsburg owns. The city is fortunate to have cooperative partners in James City County and York County to provide mutual aid as needed. The 3 fire departments work well together in ensuring the well-being of all residents in the greater Williamsburg region and have been working together for many years to provide the coverage. We're also fortunate to have a dedicated, passionate Williamsburg Fire Department, volunteer fire department, even though many members of this group aren't even city residents. They help in many ways, especially for fundraising, and I would like to remind the public that we can all support their efforts by selecting Williamsburg Volunteer Fire Department as the beneficiary of Amazon's Smile program. And so my decision is that I support the demolition and rebuild of Station Number 1 as our top priority.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. Thank you very much as well for everyone coming today to listen to the discussion. Of course, thank you for the folks who came on Monday and stayed for a even lengthier discussion. Thanks to anybody who might be watching from home. I know myself, I feel a bit newer to this discussion, having not been a department head or serving on city council in 2018. So I've learned a lot about the imperatives of our fire service in the city since, and certainly done as much work to get caught up to the issue as I can. And from that, I made a similar list as Vice Mayor Dent about the realities that we have right now. The most notable being in 2018, I took a tour of the fire department, and in 2020, I took a tour of the fire department. And in both cases, nothing had changed. There were leaks from the ceiling dripping into buckets. In our presentation on Monday, we heard about the carcinogenic areas that are sometimes first responders can be exposed to. We heard about the lack of spacing in some of our overnight stays. We heard about the sewer lines being backed up. So it's clear to me that there's a necessity for a major addressing of that department, which doesn't seem that it could be adequately addressed in a simple renovation as it could in a rebuild. I think if we were to renovate it now, we very well might be needing to rebuild it in the future. The second reality that we live in is that we have allotted money from borrowed years ago to the tune of about $14.5 million to expend on public safety infrastructure. And one of the changes that has happened since the money was borrowed is that we are now in a tighter economy. I am hard-pressed to think that we, in spending over this money, would be good stewards of the public trust. So a couple of the items that I think have changed since 2018 is that the consultancy, Guernsey and Tingle, did come back to say that while at first their recommendations were to renovate, they've now realized that the department needs a total rebuilding of the building. The data has come into some question. There's been a discussion around it and how certain locations may have seemed that they were single family units when instead there were plenty of people that lived there. The first that comes to mind is Brown Hall, which came up in our GIS system as a single unit when instead it houses dozens of residents. As I mentioned, the economy has certainly gotten tighter since, meaning that we need to be good stewards of the money borrowed for public safety infrastructure. And we've also had, as we saw at the end of the fire station presentation on Monday, a realization that a number of other departments are in need of CIP programs as well. In the work session, I was hoping to learn about the temporary plan and the staffing necessities, which I believe the presentation spoke to highly and were very informational. I've also learned a lot from the public, and I know my other council colleagues have got many of calls and texts and emails. There was even a Facebook page created, I saw, with all of our cell phones and emails created to call in. I've heard from people on both sides of the issue, and I'm incredibly appreciative of everyone who decided to let us know their thoughts. So my current stance is, in being good stewards of the public funds, that is, we do need to fully rebuild Station 1 rather than renovate, which was the plan that came forward by Guernsey and Tingle, working closely with our city staff to reach this conclusion. In doing so, it doesn't seem that we would be able to move ahead with Station 2, as the left side of the spectrum of what they recommended for what it might cost was $13 million. And initially I was concerned about this, but I know that we will be well served with our history of incredibly beneficial mutual aid in the area. And on quality of service, I see this as an incredibly exciting investment into our fire department rather than the opposite. We are going to expand the square footage of the fire department, including areas specifically for volunteers, along with address severe problems that they've had for a while. As I mentioned, the inadequate space in the bay, the backed up sewers, the exposure to carcinogenic areas. So let me be clear, on my mind, and I believe on council's as well, Stations 2 is still at the forefront. It was mentioned that Chief Eagle recommended eventually we may need to have 3 stations. But I'm hopeful we can provide funding over the next few years so that we can commit to a station now, and in a few years when we have the ability to fund that, have a better idea about where it can be to best address the response times. For now though, I know we'll be well served with a brand new station, including expanded spaces of the admin, the EOC, the volunteer space, so that all of our first responders are able to serve the city to the best of their ability. And I will plan on voting for the rebuild of our current headquarters with the funds borrowed for public safety infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Many of my thoughts were spoken here on my left, and certainly with Vice Mayor Dent. You know, I have the misfortune or honor or privilege or whatever you want to call it to have voted one way some time ago. But now I think in light of where we are today with the information that we have today, the questions that have been raised about response times, the lack of modeling, the concerns of for me, what it means to have a second station, and the impact that that has on Station 1 in terms of response times, I think that's going to have a negative effect, which ultimately would require us to perhaps buy more apparatuses and staff more than we would even consider today. And I just think the potential of a second station today has an unwielding future in terms of capital outlay and operational expense. And to me, that's alarming, particularly given where we are with the new COVID economy. As we talked about earlier, we don't know what that's going to look like moving forward. It's going to be a new normal. I think some things have changed with our mutual aid relationships in terms of how the counties are relying less on us. And not that we have any problem supporting them and them supporting us. I think it's a wonderful relationship, and I'm sure that the chiefs and all the staffs will continue that in that effort to make sure that all the members of the community remain safe and all the property remain safe. So. Moving forward, I do, as Mr. Rogers said, I think we could be committed to a second station. I think we can make that commitment annually in our CIP to set aside some funds to make that happen at the right time. And we'll know what that right time looks like, perhaps in 3, 4, 5 years. You know, once Midtown Road gets fully developed and occupied, High Street gets fully developed and occupied, Riverside, there's about 1,500 rooftops slated to be there when it's all done. And I think that's going to be a different city than what we're faced with today. And that may impact, it certainly will impact, where that second station goes. But we need to get there first. So committed to supporting a second fire station. I think, as Chief said, and Vice Mayor Dent, you know, we probably need 3 stations. But we got to get there, and we have to have the ability to pay. But we also have the data that supports that decision going forward. And I think as we move forward, I know the chief and city manager are committed to making sure that we are collecting the right data, so that at that time we do a study with the professional, we'll have the right input information so we get the best results in terms of the study. My fear of only renovating Station 1, as Mr. Rogers pointed out, it's a Band-Aid. It's going to get us another 10 years. This building is 44 years old, and trying to, you know, put lipstick on that pig is only pushing that can down the road, and we can't do that any longer. And trying to retrofit or save the EOC because it's only 11 years old and build around it is not effective use of the space, and won't ultimately give us the product that we need. And that product that we need is a station that can house all of the current firefighters, a growing staff, perhaps with some new apparatuses in the future, and it's close to the hub. And if we built out on the end of the spoke, I think it throws us in an imbalance, and that's not fair to the entire city. And I think we can continue to offer the great service and protect our community like we have for the last 40-some years with a single station. And that, I believe, will only be enhanced with a building that is adequately built and staffed, and I think that's our future. So, do you have a motion?
Yes, Mayor Pons, I have a motion which I think expresses the sentiments that you have. I move that City Council rescind its previous authorization for construction of a second fire station and authorize the city manager to procure the design and construction of a new fire station to be located at 440 North Boundary Street, consistent with the completed programming plan. Furthermore, the city manager should proceed with the planning process for a second fire station with the expectation that such station will be programmed for a time frame of 5 to 7 years. Such planning shall include location analysis, financial planning for construction, and for required adequate staffing for such a station.
I second that.
Is there any other discussion?
Is there a budget?
I was just going to ask if you would mind making the motion again. Just,
Could you restate the motion?
it was a little lengthy there at the end. I just want to make sure I got it.
Read the whole thing.
If you could just do the second part where,
The second part was as far as the planning process for a second fire
Yes.
station, with the expectation that such station will be programmed for a time period of 5 to 7 years, and such planning shall include location analysis, financial planning for construction, and the required adequate staffing for such a station.
thank you.
The question, is there a budget?
Not for the second station,
Was there a budget for the first one?
within the,
So I think we would operate within the current funds. I
that
think
we
it-
have for public safety.
Mr. Rogers stated, and I certainly agree, and I think staff feels that we can demolish and rebuild Station 1 with the current funds that we have available without having to go borrow any money or spend from our capital reserve funds.
But for the public, can we state that number?
I think it's, Drew,
14.4
Pull it
million.
up so I have the exact number.
well, we know we borrowed $13 million, and over a course of time, we've been able to increase that amount just north of $14 million.
It's $14,576,170.
And so the next step, as was pointed out earlier, when we enter into the PPAE agreement or process, we will establish a budget for bidders to work within. And certainly, I don't know that it needs to be much greater than that, or doesn't need to be greater than that. But all that will unravel as the design building gets underway. So I have a second on the motion. Ms. Felica, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
No.
Mr. Maslin?
No.
Thank you, everybody. That takes us to new business.
Are we allowed to just,
Would you like to have something to say?
yeah, if you don't mind. He's still here. I just wanted to say, regardless, I made my comments about where I think that the critical factors for me, but what I wanted to comment on is that I'm not an architect, so in no way am I questioning Guernsey Tingle's, what they presented, what they were asked to do. And in fact, I've worked with Mr. Cronin on several projects in the past, so I appreciate all the work. I know you've been asked multiple times to present different things, so I just want to say thank you and, appreciate all the work you've done for the city and getting us to the point where we are now. And additionally, because of where I came from, I also want Chief Eagle to know that I'm not sitting here trying to dictate to him how he runs his fire department based on my previous experience. I'm making decisions, a policy decision, what I thought was best for the city, and I just wanted them to know that before we move forward. And again, appreciate all the conversation with all the council members as we work through this process. And as I said in my comments, we'll move forward now, and I'll keep advocating for addressing response times as we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, comment. So my request would be going forward on projects like this, that there be a transparent side-by-side comparison of alternatives. We want alternatives, but it's got to be transparent side-by-side. And also, I think we should define what the public engagement process should be for those projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maslin. New business, presentation and discussion of William and Mary's path forward plan to return students to Williamsburg for the 2020 fall semester. Mr. Jones, welcome. Please, over here. No, I'm sorry, up front. You're right.
Flash.
That is the path forward.
There we go. So just to be sure, I have to say, when I walked in and I saw all the masks, I was quite pleased. Certainly, that's something that we at William and Mary are promoting in a serious way. I will say, though, that I see that, when you try to do this, your glasses fog up. So if I stutter along the way, I'm going to blame it on that and not anything else. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, and the City Manager for the opportunity to speak to you about and give you an update on William and Mary's plan for the fall. You don't have to look far to see that we are here. Our freshmen and transfer students started moving in yesterday. That continues today in spite of the weather. Let me also thank you for the welcome signs that have been strategically placed around campus. It's great to see that the city continues to be welcoming for the students that we bring here and all that we do. Thank you to the city manager for sending out the flyer, to the community and to the landlords, asking for flexibility, maybe in their leases, realizing that students and their families are having to make their own decisions about whether to come or whether to come to William and Mary remotely or whether to come here on campus. And that flexibility will be really important financially for them as they make those decisions. I will address a number of issues that have been raised and try to answer some of the questions that we received in advance from folks. Thank you for those. As President Rowe has stated, he sort of put all this in perspective, that the health environment that we're in is just going to continue to evolve. And therefore, we need flexibility in what we're able to do. Think about just recently, having had the spike that occurred in this area right after July 4th, the governor took action and issued an executive order that limited flexibility there. But the universities around here, including William and Mary, also took action. We altered our plans for admissions. In our case, we moved to a scenario where instead of bringing all the students back over the next few days, we're bringing in freshmen, transfer students, and international students. And then there'll be a hiatus until we get to around Labor Day when we'll bring in the rest of our students. And that's really just an indication of the fact that we have to all be flexible as we deal with this pandemic, we always say it's unprecedented for at least 100 years in terms of doing that. As we go forward, we continue to monitor trends. We are looking at national data on caseloads, hospitalizations, positivity rates, hospital capacity, but we're also looking at that data regionally and locally here. And again, I want to commend the city with the Greater Williamsburg Partnership, where they have pulled together and led weekly meetings of the major employers here on campus, here in the city and the surrounding area, local governments, local schools, and also the hospitals, so that we can all keep a sense of what is actually happening in this environment. We'll always continue to review the CDC, Virginia Department of Health, governor's orders as we move forward through the semester, react to those. But I will emphasize that at William and Mary, we tend to see those guidelines as the minimums, and we tend to do more than that. And our testing is the best example, and I'll talk a little bit about that later as we go forward. So again, while the health situation will evolve, we do know one thing. This fall, William and Mary will be different. There's no question about it. Our primary goal continues, though, to be to provide the best education in the country to the students who come here, and to support that teaching and learning activities, the teaching activities, the instructional activities of our faculty, as well as the learning that has to go on with our students. But now the emphasis also has to be on how do you do that in the most safe manner possible. And, we, as our COVID response team that we created, all of our work over the last few months has been focused on how do we make it a safe environment for students to come here, and that's safe for our students, for our employees, and for the community. We do so and have approached it in 4 different ways. Education, and I'll talk about each one of these just for a moment. Education, prevention, testing and tracing, that is following around what happens if somebody tests positive and who are they with, and then ultimately treatment, including quarantining and isolation. And again, we'll try to respond to some of the questions, as I go through here. Mr. Mayor, I leave it to you whether you want folks to ask questions as I go through this or whether you want to wait till the end. That's entirely up to you.
I think we'll wait till the end. Otherwise, we may get bogged down in some things, and you'll be here till Christmas.
We'll try not to be that long.
That's right.
So first, education. We've been preparing our students and our employees all over the summer, and basically since the students left after spring break, when our faculty did a tremendous job in about 10 days converting 2,000 courses into online courses. But we've been preparing and educating them about what to expect when you come back, realizing, as I said earlier, that environment is always changing. We've done a number of town halls. Probably some of you have seen those along the way, and that's run the gamut from town halls with employees to students and their families, specific to faculty, all of the different populations that we have out there, to just keep people to understand that, and as they make their decisions to come, what's it going to be like? How's it going to work here? And ultimately, is it safe? Our message has always been, as I said earlier, William and Mary is going to be different. Our education program culminated this week when we released a series of 5 modules plus our community health pledge commitment to the campus. Now, this is mandatory training for our employees and for our students. As those of you who've been around other folks who work at William and Mary, usually we don't like words like mandatory and required, but in this case, no question about it. Those modules deal with everything from, a little bit of education about the virus. We didn't spend a lot of time on that piece, but talking about physical distancing, talking about hand washing and sanitation, talking about masks, a lot about masks, because we are about masks all the time on William and Mary. Notice our signage that we have out front. And then ultimately, though, we also have a module there that you might not expect, and that's one about intervention. And so, how do you have one student have the courage to speak to another student who might not be wearing that mask? Maybe intentionally, probably mostly just because they forgot it, and that type of thing. And so giving the students power, other employees, even with their supervisors, the tools to be able to take and respond to that and bring everyone back into the fold, because that's what we want. We're really looking for a culture change that deals with behavior on campus and how we interact with each other on campus while we continue to deliver education to our students. And as I said, our education program, that's all good. When you get to the end, the last thing everyone acknowledges and accepts is the Healthy Together community commitment. So you acknowledge that, you accept that, and I would emphasize that that's for not just our own campus students and our own campus population. That's for our Williamsburg population and students throughout the community as well. And as I mentioned, we supported that with signage along the way, You know, I love the sandwich board that stands there in front of Duke of Gloucester Street, and you walk across the street, and it says, we wear a mask here, and we physically distance, and expect folks to do that. So that's about education. Now, what about prevention? Interestingly, the guidelines that the CDC put out when this first started still really hold. Stay at home if you're sick. Stay in that dorm room if you're not feeling well. Wash your hands. Wear your mask, although there was that little debate along the way. I think everyone has concluded now that wear your mask, practice physical distancing. If you do those things, then we will continue to flatten that curve to keep the spread of the virus down to a minimum. These are all part of the Healthy Together commitment that I mentioned earlier, and as I said, apply to all of our students and all of our employees, whether they're on or on campus. Now, one of the questions that we've gotten is, well, what about enforcement of that commitment? How does that work? First off, as I said, we stress compliance, and we want that culture change. That's where we want it to start. So we never have to get to the part of, well, what about the student who just not will comply? But having said that, you know, we will keep track of reports of anyone who doesn't comply. And if you're a student, you will end up in the Dean of Students office, being reviewed through our normal student code of conduct. And if you're an employee, you're going to end up in our HR office, explaining why you are not conforming to the standards and the requirements that we as an institution will put in. So there will be teeth behind that commitment that everyone has signed on to as they complete the training. Other actions that we have done, again, in this prevention mode is, you know, we've asked all the students to self-quarantine for 8 days before they come to campus. You might say, well, why 8 days? We always hear about 14. 8 days is sort of the incubation period for the virus. And so if you've self-quarantined for that, so that's a first stop. We have issued kits to every student and every employee. Kit's got 2 masks. This is one of them from my kit. 2 masks, hand sanitizer, and disinfectant wipes. Also has a little education pamphlet in it about, you know, what should you be doing? How should this work? Now you might say, well, everybody already has a mask. Everybody already knows about hand sanitation. Well, you know, there's a symbolism, right, associated with us providing that kit. To say, not only do we think this is an expectation for you, we're giving you the tools to comply and working with that. A third thing that we're doing is we have a daily health checker that each student and each employee will have. Basically, pull out your smartphone, and it will ask you 4 questions. 2 of them are behavioral, but then it has a question that says, do you have any of these 4 symptoms? And I'll give you one example. So do you have shortness of breath that's not caused by any other pre-existing condition? If you say yes, it gives you a red X. And that red X says if you're a student, go to the Student Health Center. If you're an employee, go to your health provider. And then the 4th question is one that has all the symptoms that you see, the 8 to 10 symptoms from the CDC. Do you have any of these things? We expect somebody's always going to have a headache, not going to feel right, you know, and those type of things. It's probably going to give you a yellow X, say keep watching your symptoms. Now, what's important about the daily health check is we're not monitoring people's responses. So we don't see that Sam Jones said, oh, I've got shortness of breath. What we do see, though, is did Sam Jones take it? And if we go 48 hours and we see that someone hasn't responded, hasn't been checking, we'll follow up. After 72, the follow-up gets a lot stronger with that. So again, you know, the behavioral change, it takes about a minute to do this. So we're not talking about anything that's greatly burdensome. And I'll underscore initiatives from the Virginia Department of Health while I'm talking about this, is that we also have at the same point where you pull up that daily health check, a connection to the COVID-WISE system that the governor and the Virginia Department of Health have recently put out. We don't require that because that's not our system, but we give access to it. And that helps with contact tracing down the road if there is a positive positive test. Just a few other things that we've done on the prevention side, and I'll go through these quickly. We continue to limit university travel, both domestic and international, any university-sponsored travel. And we're encouraging folks not to personally travel. We can't require that, but we are emphasizing that as best we can. I think everyone knows that William & Mary, once the students left, we went to telework in a significant way. We continue to promote that where it makes sense. So in a situation where it's a public-facing office, it's a student service office, those folks are likely to be back on campus. So we will have more employees on campus in the fall than we would have had in late spring when we were going through that. But where people can telework, we figured the fewer people who come to campus, the better off we are. And as long as we can provide the essential services and the education to the students and the populations that we serve, that's a good thing to do. Virtually all of our meetings and speakers this fall are going to be held virtually. So the idea is, and being so close to Washington, D.C., for example, we have ambassadors and other folks who are invited to classes all the time. We said, yep, we still want you to do that as a faculty member, but we don't want them coming for their health and ours to do that. And then finally, we're limiting third-party use of our facilities. As you know, we're a good neighbor to a lot of groups. What used to be called the Christopher Wren Association, now called OSHA, is just one example of a group that we would let use our facilities for lifelong learning. Again, they're doing all of their things online because we don't want to expose those populations or our own to anything. So again, education, prevention, testing and contact tracing. We are robust, as the word we're using, in the amount of testing that we are doing. We are exceeding the CDC guidelines, we're exceeding the Virginia Department of Health guidelines, and that is intentional because we want to know what is the condition of our students and our employees when they come to campus, and then how does that change over time. So in support of that, we are testing all of our students before they come to campus, and you have to have a negative result before you can move into our dorms or before you can go into classes and that type of thing. After that, we will do what's called prevalence testing. So we will be testing, right now we're planning on 5% of the student population every 2 weeks, because once we have a baseline, and I will tell you right now, the number of positive tests are in the single digits. So think about that, as we've tested a good number of our students already. But we are in that situation where we want to be able to, over time, see if that's our baseline, how's it changing? So we do that prevalence testing. For employees, we are not testing every employee when they come back. There are certain groups of employees who cannot avoid close contact with students or other groups that we are asking to be tested. That's about 700, I think, of our employees. And we'll also prevalence test them. We'll run samples to do that, to see what's going on with us. And that puts us in a position where we can compare our data, both trend internally, but also what's going on in the community around us, and where do we sit with that. So I'll tell you a question that's come up about this. I did a presentation virtually with the Kiwanis a couple of weeks ago. Time flies. Feels like it, yes, sir. And then the question was, well, will we release our test results? I will tell you, we're talking to our general counsel about that. We're currently working on a dashboard that would be a public dashboard. It would include some VDH data that I think we all can access. It just takes a few steps to get there so that people can know what's going on in the community, what's in the region, as well as in Williamsburg. But as I said, since we're having, to this point, a limited number of positive tests, we're very sensitive to the fact that, student records are student records. Health records are health records. And if you only have one positive test, you can kind of figure out who that might be. So again, we're working through that, and we'll have more information on that later. But, we do intend to have a dashboard that folks can easily accessible that is available for both the community as well as here. So finally, if you've got education, prevention, testing, well, what about treatment, quarantine, and isolation? What happens when we have a positive case? So if the folks are doing their daily health check, that's going to send them either to their health service provider if they're an employee, and then it goes the normal path that it would be for any of us if we went there. The health check provider can tell a student, you should go to the student health center. Doesn't require them to, but it tells them to. Or if they just get up and they're just not feeling right, they can take and show up just as like sometimes you just get up and think, I need to go to the doctor. I'm just not right there. So what would happen with the student? I'll just stay with that. Is the student would go to our student health center. They'll get a clinical assessment. If the physician thinks, yep, you may have the COVID-19 virus, we will do a test there. We have the rapid antigen test on hand, so it isn't like we have to wait 3 or 4 days to get the result. We'll get that result while the student is there. And all of our students are coming in by appointment this fall, and they will be told, when you come, you need to bring what you might need if you get put into isolation. So if a student tests positive through the testing that's done by the Student Health Center, they will immediately go to Richmond Hall, down the road here, and they will go into isolation. And we have all the services for the students, food and everything that goes along with that, in place to support those students. We have 102 rooms there. You could actually house more than 102 students. Because if you think about it, if you have 2 positive students, they both have the virus and probably are asymptomatic, that is, they're not showing the symptoms, but they've tested for it, you actually could have those students too. So we would have some additional capacity there as well. So one of the questions that related to that was, would other students be at Richmond Hall other than these students? And the answer to that is no. We're using it just for that purpose. Contact tracing, the second piece of that. For the student who tests positive, the VDH has put in place contact tracing. We are actually talking with them about agreeing to an MOU that would allow us to do it on campus so we could do it quicker in terms of moving to that. So again, what questions came up, from you and others about the quarantine and isolation? Is Richmond Hall only used for this purpose? The answer to that is yes. The question has come up, would we quarantine or isolate students at Richmond Hall who live off campus? The answer to that is no. They are citizens of the city, and they would be expected to act as any other citizen would be. Now, what I would say is, whether a student's on campus or off, if we know they're going into isolation, which is a minimum under the CDC guidelines of 10 days, if they can, we're going to actually recommend they go home rather than stay in isolation, either in their house in the city or on campus. We're not going to require them to do that, but that's what we suggest. If they choose not to go home, then they would be in their home. So the other question that came up associated with this was, and what we'd want you to remember is that all of these students have signed a Healthy Together commitment. So if they don't do what they're supposed to, then, and it turns out that there's a student, and this is on campus or off, who just will not comply, they don't belong at William and Mary. And we'll deal with that as we need to. Now, I'm hopeful we don't have any of those, but we are not going to let it pass because we're committed to making sure that the campus and the community at large stays as safe as possible. Finally, Mr. Mayor, and I'm getting close to being at the end to get to your questions, is that people said, well, what about all the other times that students are not in class and not sleeping? We are an active campus. A significant part of the benefits of coming to an institution like William and Mary or the co-curricular activities that go on that really provide folks with leadership opportunities. You know, we have something like 400 student organizations out there. We will continue to have those operating, but they, again, will operate very differently. We have encouraged them to say that depth over breadth is important. Do fewer events, fewer activities, do them well. And each one of those will have to have its own COVID plan, including registration for anyone who attends an event. And so therefore, you know, we'll know who was there should there be a positive test that works through that. So again, you know, we're looking at that. The other thing you will notice if you go around campus is tents are popping up in a variety of ways, big ones and small ones as well. We will use the outdoors extensively for both co-curricular and instructional activities because being outdoors, being in the fresh air, all of that is good rather than bad in terms of controlling the virus. We're adding outdoor lighting in a variety of areas for after dark activities, buying Adirondack chairs at volume, as well as some camp chairs as well. Because again, we just want folks to not just think, oh, I've just got to stay in my dorm room or in my classroom, but I want to be able to get out and work well and have, you know, activities that are all part of the college experience, the university experience, beyond just the educational side of that. Programming, looking forward to the outdoor movies. I'm old enough to remember drive-in theaters. Most of you know, some of the folks here probably don't know what that was, or they've only seen it in passing. But you know, it'll be a variation on the theme, you know, with that, and also ways to do virtual speakers in large volume for large groups and that type of thing. All of that with appropriate physical distancing. So just as you've been able to do here, you've had to limit the number of folks who can come in here. We're doing that through all of our classroom, all of our facilities, and we would do it outdoors. Overlaid on that would be the governor's guidance about how many people can get together in a group. As long as those are tight, that will limit some of the things we do. As those open up, we would have more opportunities for venues. Now, Mr. Mayor, I'd stop with that, and I'd be glad to take any questions. I would like to make a final comment at the end, if you would allow me.
Sure. Well, thank you for coming in. You know, I'm really impressed with what I'm hearing coming out of the university in terms of this commitment to staying healthy. You know, I think some of the results that you're already seeing in the single digits, I think is really a bright spot in all of this, and hopefully as we move forward together as a community, those numbers will stay low and we won't have a problem that we have to deal with, whether it's staff or students or the community at large. I think the lingering question is the students that live off campus, and I understand that as they come back to the university, they have to sign on to the community healthy commitment. Right?
That's close.
They too sign this agreement. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, and they also are subject to testing.
Yes, sir. All students are tested, whether they're going to be. It's not just the on-campus students; it's everyone. All of them are required to take the training that I mentioned, and all of them have to accept, which means they will comply with the Healthy Together commitment.
Sure. And I certainly can appreciate that those students that live off campus are citizens of the city. Frankly, I think all students are citizens of the city.
That is true. Yes, sir.
And I can see the distinct relationship between students that live on campus and off campus in terms of the contractual arrangement that they have with the university. But I feel like there's a gap in there. When we ask that student who may test positive for COVID to quarantine in their home or go back to their permanent home, and the ability to enforce and monitor those students to make sure that they're complying. I think it's easier when they're on campus or in Richmond Hall. And so I think there's a deficiency there. And I don't know if you can speak to that or reassure us that somehow the university is going to monitor those students off campus that test positive to ensure that they are in fact staying quarantined. And then what does that mean for their roommates?
Well, we will know that the student has tested positive, even if they're an off-campus student. That's the first thing. And so as part of our protocols, we'll be reaching out to those students because they are still our students on a daily basis to find out how they're doing. Are there symptoms, increasing or decreasing, or are they continuing to be asymptomatic? And the students are going to want to cooperate with us on that because, we're going to have to say, yes, you've gone 10 days, the required period. You don't have a fever. That's not and you're not keeping the fever down by taking Tylenol or something like that, that you don't have a fever, and that your symptoms aren't getting worse. Because, those are the 3 CDC criteria for bringing someone out of isolation. So that we will be in contact with those students all along.
Good. Thank you. Vice Mayor Dunn?
So certainly, as you started out the presentation and being an unprecedented time, so I certainly appreciate all the amount of work I can't imagine the work that went in to develop this plan. I did have a few questions. One, you hear from other organizations, but have you seen an impact with employees who maybe have underlying conditions that are concerned about coming back to the university?
That's a great question, Mr. Vice Mayor, and what we have said for our employees is that if you are any of the, quote, vulnerable populations, elderly, I don't know how I got there, but I did. If you have an underlying health condition, they can work with our Department of Human Resources for, any accommodations that might be required to support that. That might be letting someone telework who you otherwise would say, no, I don't know that you can do it. It might be looking for opportunities to reassign folks to a different job that allows them to telework, but still be employed, still be paid, and still bring income into their family. So yeah, we're very sensitive to that situation. And you could have some students as well, although I would argue that if you're a student and you have an underlying health condition in this environment, you probably should take your classes remotely.
So, just this morning on the news, the CDC's putting out another warning about later this fall, the concern with not only COVID, but now the possibly a flu outbreak. And this may be hypothetical, but hopefully you never have to deal with it.
Right.
But is there a threshold if there's an outbreak? Is there a threshold where the college has to make a decision that we're closing down?
One of the things I said earlier was we need to be flexible. And part of the dashboard and the president has formed a public health advisory committee with 2 physicians and epidemiologists on it, chaired by our chief operating officer. So we will, first off, on the data side, just continue to monitor constantly the trends of what's going on and react to that as we need to. And that could be, locally, what's going on here, again, as we saw the governor do for the Hampton Roads area earlier, or it could be something that happens nationally. I would point out, and I haven't talked today really about the academic side of the house, but one of the adjustments that we did make was, we intentionally compressed our academic calendar. So, our intent, well, not our intent, it's what we are doing is, we're starting a week earlier, so that's why you're seeing the students here now instead of the next week. We don't have a fall break, and we will finish, including exams, by Thanksgiving. So the planning at that point, and remember we were doing that before the latest spike and that type of thing, but we were holding to it, is that we recognize that when you get into late November and you get into December, back then the plan's saying that's when the spike was going to be. And of course, that's when you first get that onset of flu. So our thinking was finish up the semester early and then have that 6 weeks or so when the students are all gone. If there's a spike, it has a chance to calm down before you bring anyone back in the spring.
And then, when you talk about the self-quarantine at Richmond Hall, other than the signed commitment, there's no other way to ensure that the student is self-quarantined. It's an honor system that they're self-quarantining for.
Well, the ones who initially go into Richmond Hall will be actually in isolation, so.
Right,
Not to get
isolation.
technical, isolation means you have it, or you've been
Right.
tested positive. Quarantine means you've been around somebody and you
isolation
might
is-
have it. So those will be referred from our student health center. So we will know those students in place. They will have contact with college employees who check on them, not only just dropping off food, but check on their welfare every day. So we will know that they're not leaving, if that's the question, to go out and go other places.
Okay. One question that came up from some people in the community was, with the off-campus students, is there going to be, other than calling the police department or calling the city, is the college going to have a way for a community to report students that aren't adhering to
Absolutely.
the guidelines?
I don't believe it's active yet, but we are putting in place what will be called COVID concerns at wm.edu. And that will be available for both on-campus and off-campus folks to report behavior that they think they need to. We have a team already in place that will monitor that daily, and then we'll feed back to students or whatever, in terms of those activities. And again, that's one of the ways to pull them into, our oversight with the dean of students in terms of that. And again, I mentioned earlier that part of our training is to, how to be that courageous person that says, I just don't understand why you don't wear your mask every day, right? Some people are never going to get comfortable with that, and they might want to say, well, no offense, the city manager never wears his, and what kind of example is that? Sorry, Drew. And so, we put it in place for that, but it's also available to the community.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sam, thanks for the presentation. I was going to ask you how retirement is, but I understand, just like some of our GIO projects, you've got COVID delay on that, right?
That is. I don't know about your projects. I can only speak to. I am working longer hours than I ever worked when I was senior vice president. In terms of this, and
realizing
glad to do it though.
Yeah, realizing how visual cues are really important, especially for people now coming on campus.
Sure.
What's and this may be politically charged, in terms of what's the philosophy in putting masks on the campus statues?
Didn't expect that question. As you say, in this environment, statues have their own interest. If we think it can be safely done and send a message to our students and to the environment about health and safety, that's one thing. Other than that, it probably sits pretty far down the chain of the activities we would take to ensure that our students are complying and visitors to campus are complying with safety measures.
So we know this is the first academic year where both the freshman and sophomore classes are required to be in dorms. Can you tell us how many more students are now living on campus because of that?
Well, let me answer it slightly differently. Right now, we have over 3,900 students that are registered for our housing, just over that. And that's about 83% of our capacity. So what we have done this year is we have recognized that every family and every student's situation is going to be different. There are some folks that are itching to come to William & Mary as a freshman, and they're like, just tell me how to get here and tell me how to get in. There are other folks, because of the environment that we're in and the health environment that we're in, that they're saying, wait, I don't want to do it, but I'm going to take my first semester online and take remote classes. And so the combination of that has resulted in that we're not at full capacity, even though we have the policy change in, because we are not holding to that. We have extended the deadline, I'm going to say September 1st, but I may be off on that date, for families to say, even at the last minute, we're just not comfortable with that. And so we're really leaving that up to the families to do. I hope that answered your question, sir.
But I think the other side of that is those people are probably not living outside the campus in Williamsburg.
Oh, no.
So
no.
it's like there's-
If they are, if you are a freshman or a sophomore and you are coming to the campus, you will live in campus housing. That part is still, it's just we've given people flexibility to study remotely who ordinarily we would not have, because that would not have been an option for them.
So do you have an estimate, though, with the new policy, how many less students would be looking for housing across from the campus, outside?
Oh, I have no idea what's happening with it. Again, I mentioned the flyer that was sent out that encouraged landlords to be flexible, but I have no data on that part.
In terms of the Healthy Together?
Yes, sir.
So what's been the involvement with the student leaders in that process?
Oh, they worked with Vice President for Student Affairs, Ginger Ambler, in terms of developing that. They had a chance to review it. They reviewed the language. I will tell you, our students leaders, they wanted more detail. And we said, look, it's got to, we get the point across with what we have. So we're actually going to be heavily dependent on our student leaders, not just of the student government that you folks see, but also of all of these other 400 organizations, because they're going to set the standard for how things work within their little unit. So if you're an a cappella group, you're going to set that standard of how do you practice, and you do it in a way that's safe, or any of the other groups. And so but to your basic question, student leadership was involved in that as part of developing it, and we're very comfortable with us requiring all of the students to sign on.
Now, following up on a previous question about the off-campus students who test positive and are not available to go into Richmond Hall, from a public health standpoint, do you really want to be encouraging them to travel home? I mean, especially the flying, is that really something?
And every student's situation is going to be different. If you live in Richmond and you're here and you're ill, then to have your parents come get you, for you to drive home, yeah, I would say do that. Will folks want to say, I'm going to fly back to California? Probably not. And again, like I said, we'll be in touch with those students daily to ensure that, if they're in isolation, that they're, one, staying in isolation, but two, also supported, that they don't feel left out of things. And again, most students, if you think about this age demographic, they'll test positive, but they won't have any symptoms. So the good news about our academic curriculum is our most courses have both a online or remote component as well as the in-person component. So if you're a student who has to be in isolation for the 10 days, you still got access to your course. You don't lose in that. And again, I give our faculty great credit for being able to pivot both ways and develop it in both ways to have that work so that the student doesn't get penalized. We're big on participation and all that, and the faculty recognize, it's not the student's fault. That the virus has its own mind and it goes where it wants to go.
I was talking to one of our local landlords about, should William Mary have a place for students to go in for isolation, and how the recommendation is to maybe go home. And he said, his comment was, this is their home.
No,
and especially, students living in a multi-student apartment, they're with their friends, and maybe it's even easier to handle isolation there than going back to a family with, maybe people
and that is not a decision for us to make, because even for the students who live on campus, we'll say, would you be more comfortable going home than being in isolation in Richmond Hall? But if they say, I want to stay, well, that's where they'll be.
What, can you tell us a little bit more about the VCU Medical Services and the building behind the community center there? Because there was some messaging that went out that those services are also available for the greater community. And
Our focus, I can give you a very general, is that pre-COVID, we were already looking to partner with some health service provider to expand the health services and the mental health services available to our students. So that got us down the path of that. VCU Health Services was the entity that won that contract. And, you know, you could say we knew something, or sometimes you're just fortunate in terms of timing. That also brought us access to all of their health service expertise through the medical center in Richmond. And so, you know, they quickly became our partners in addition to what we originally expected in terms of the testing protocols and that type of thing. I would say right now we're focused on the testing, getting the students here, getting all that in place. But eventually it will come back around and there'll be some clarity on the being available. We know it was going to be available to our other employees. I frankly haven't seen the details of that contract to say whether it be available to other citizens as well.
okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Ramsey?
Hello, Sam. Nice to see you again. I fall into the same category that you do.
Class of 75.
Yeah, since we're classmates. So I learned I was old once I signed up for Medicare. So you mentioned just a few questions
Yes, ma'am.
and comments of things I've heard. So you mentioned that you will try and assist students to help with intervention, particularly for those who aren't wearing masks. Will there be masks in different areas around campus so that if someone has forgotten one, they'll be able to pick one up?
Absolutely. I mean, we know, you know, probably most of us here have gone out and gotten to our car and realized they didn't bring their mask with them and had to go back and get it. Or you've shown up to go in the grocery store or wherever, oh man. So we know that will happen with students. So we have building coordinators for all of our buildings, and they will have a supply of the one-day disposable mask. Mm-hmm. And so if a student comes in and a faculty member sees it, you know, the faculty member says, hey, you need to have a mask on. The student will say, I forgot it. And the faculty member will say, go down to room 203, and they'll give you one, you know, and remember it next time.
And what about temperature testing? Will that be done on campus, or is that only if a student goes to, like, the health center?
Well, of course, you're right. If they go to the health center, we've encouraged all of our students to bring thermometers so that they could take their own temperature. But timely question, because we just had arrived yesterday 4 temperature kiosks, which basically, you know, it's an iPad type thing, and you stare at it, and it stares back, and it tells you, yes, you're good because your temperature is below 100.4, or no, you're not because it's above. We'll put those in high traffic areas. Right now, we're planning on the Sadler Center, because, of course, lots of students in there, but also major dining. The campus center, again, student activity and dining, swim library, and a fourth one that is not coming to the Commons as well. So covering all 3 of the dining facilities plus swim library as really the 4 facilities that our students most use. We thought about the rec center because you're probably thinking, well, they go to the rec center all the time. The problem with that as we talk with the folks there is they're elevating anyway,
Right.
and lots of students will run. So they might come in with a temperature because they just ran across campus to come and do their workout.
Well, speaking of the rec center, I've been taking a lot of the Zoom classes, and I'm not sure if I'll be allowed to attend in person, but I hope that those virtual classes will continue during the fall.
We will see, but in terms of you attending in person, we will discourage that as part of our just keeping down the numbers of folks on campus.
And I applaud your testing robustness. And in a conversation yesterday, I learned that the self-test is not as, I guess, onerous as the test that anyone who has currently had it, where it sticks the nasal swab way up. So I was glad to hear that. I think it'll be much more likely for students to test and then to do that on a regular basis if needed.
Yeah, I have not heard any reports that, tests are coming back and not being appropriate because they were not administered. I will say that we, and I guess probably the rest of the testing world, are still looking for that flu test type, that takes 15, you swab and your doctor can tell you in 5 minutes you've got the flu or you don't. We're still looking for those. Getting closer, like I said, we have some rapid antigen tests available to us through our health center, but those take about 45 minutes to clear. So it's, the next step in testing is getting that the rapid response to that, and that will make all the difference in the world.
Well, and I also think as far as the test, that it's really good that you're creating a culture of non-stigmatism, for taking the test and being positive, because I think that's one thing that probably residents here in the city who are not students are, they may not feel great and say, oh, I don't want to go get a test. I don't know how it'll impact. And so I think just setting that from the standard from the very beginning, that it's okay. If you test positive, we've got ways to help you, to quarantine you. If you're around people that test positive, the best thing to do is to come forward as opposed to try and hide it. So I think
Absolutely.
that's an excellent culture to develop. And one thing too that I'd heard that goes to what Mr. Maslin was saying about students being on campus, I'd heard that you'd also extended the day student sort of circle, I guess, so that someone could qualify as a day student and live at home if they lived a little further afield.
I believe, I believe they extended it, you could be considered a commuter student for up to 60 miles. So that basically picks it up to Richmond and all of the peninsula in Hampton Roads area.
And if a student was accepted for this year, but because of the continuing pandemic, they decided they wanted to stay at home if they might have something that they just weren't sure about, can they defer?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then
Yeah, we are much more flexible than we usually would be, again, whether it's when you move into student housing or if you move into student housing. Now, we would encourage students that, if we have robust, high-quality online, remote programs and courses available to them. But there could be students who would look at that and say, that's not exactly the way I wanted to start it.
Right.
I'd rather wait a semester, or maybe even a year, come back in and get the William & Mary experience that existed pre-COVID.
well, and particularly for athletes who are not going to be able to participate in any events this fall. So the only thing that I wanted to say is we have had a couple conversations, and we on council hope to foster greater education and communication among the community as well, with the businesses and through our liaison positions, because I especially want to ensure the best means for a successful fall, and then a return in January, I assume, for second semester.
At the end, I'm going to ask the community for something. So us communicating with them, obviously to this point, we've been focused on communicating to our students and employees mostly, but I'll carry that back to our community communications team, to be sure that we are reaching out.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming in front of us today, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Jones. I'm encouraged about a group that regularly visits campus during normal times, and those are interested students, high school students who are considering William & Mary as potentially their place of study. What does the admissions process look like these days in this unprecedented time?
Still working on what it's going to look like in the fall. So I can't be so detailed. What it will not entail likely is you won't be able to take the normal tour where you're in a group of 25 and we take you into classrooms and classroom buildings and all of that. So we are working to develop materials and online activity that sort of gives you that experience. If you think about when you're designing a building and they can show you the fly around of what it would look like from all angles. You know, having those type of things so that people can understand the university without having to go through our buildings. Because again, you know, at least for the fall and until this clears, you know, we're going to be pretty stringent about that. At the same time, you know, you want to service people when they come, and we're still working through in admissions what is the best way to do someone who shows up. And right now we have the vestibule open where, you know, people can get brochures, do self-guided tours and that type of thing, but they're not having any interaction with staff. And, you know, again, still under development.
Great, thank you. To follow up on one of Ted's questions, his first one, I love the green mask. Was it ever considered to put gold stitching for the bold on it?
Yes, it was
Really?
considered. It was considered to put the cipher, right, you know, here. Yeah. But there is a cost associated with that. And when you're buying enough for 12,000 people, students and employees, and you're giving everybody to, cost does play some factor in it. Right. And these are really high quality.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I don't have any more questions, not because I'm not curious, but I just think they've all been addressed. I'm, as I think everybody should be, incredibly concerned about the coronavirus going into the fall, but I'm not concerned necessarily about the administration of William & Mary and how much it cares about it and how much it cares about its community, of which its students are one. I had the pleasure of serving as the president's aide this past year with President Rowe, and I remember our first meeting right after the massive change that happened in mid-March and how it had just so quickly become how best can we as a community stay healthy. And so I've been really pleased to see all of the messaging online, the COVID-Wise app, the fact that you all are providing, if necessary, housing for people who might test positive, and of course we'll be monitoring the health of students as well.
Absolutely, you know, and we will continue to follow that, you know, like I said, data-driven, public health data, our own data, you know, to guide us in, you know, what's the best way. 2 goals, high-quality education. That's what the students are paying for. That's what they're coming for. Done in the safest way possible.
Well, I certainly, just to close, echo Councilwoman Ramsey's thoughts that however the city can assist the school as we are partners in this community, please let us know. And I also want to say how admirable I find it of you. I looked it up, and the Flat Hat reported on your retirement on February 24th. And then just a couple of weeks later, everything changed so quickly. So thank you so much for spending your last couple months at William & Mary, serving the school and serving the community as best you can, and spending those late nights and coming in front of us. That really means a lot as a community member and as an alum. We thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jones, thank you for the presentation. I think we're all believers that William & Mary is committed to the health and well-being of the residents, of the student body, the staff, the faculty, but also concerned about the community at large. And I think the next agenda item for us is to consider taking part in that commitment, and I think we will, because we are all in this together. And I think as people struggle to wear masks today, I think it's going to be old hat. It's kind of like wearing a seatbelt. You know, it's hard to wear a seatbelt when it became law, but I think everybody now just does it instinctual. And I think masks and social distancing and will be the wave of the future. So hopefully we'll be a better community as a result of that. So, but thank you for your time, and again, congratulations.
My one moment of comments. So first off, thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk with you and you know, really talk to a lot of the details of what we've been doing and the preparations we've been putting in place. Obviously, we appreciate the partnership, you know, between the community, between the city itself, you know, the city government, you know, and the university. And it is, the mayor just said, you know, we are all in this together. I mean, you know, we rise and fall as a community, and, you know, we at William & Mary are certainly sensitive to that. Mr. Mayor, you mentioned that the council will be considering a resolution to move in partnership with the university on the Healthy Together community partnership. Obviously, we would like that. We would encourage you to consider that and to approve that. And then the last thing I would say is, you know, I want to challenge really the local businesses and the citizens of Williamsburg to come alongside the university and hopefully the city in really making this, sort of the model of how you deal with this and how everyone has a shared set of expectations. I was really thrilled yesterday when I drove around campus because, freshmen move in and everybody's excited. And to see the mask, I'll use that as the scenario, being worn across. Not quite as thrilled when I drove through CW, and down through there, because there's quite a mix. And I just think for all of us to work together to say physical distancing is important, wearing your mask is important, that will just be very helpful. So again, I just challenge the community beyond this body and this administration to come alongside of us and partner with us to make sure that this is, the healthiest fall that we can have under what is a very challenging environment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So then that does take us to agenda item B, consideration of resolution 20-16, adopting William and Mary's Healthy Together, a community commitment, establishing standards and behaviors to protect Williamsburg community from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Trivette?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, we've heard an extensive presentation on this already from William and Mary, so I won't belabor the point, but essentially, President Rowe has taken this community commitment before her body, her community at William and Mary, and instituted in an effort to establish community norms on how we're going to react and behave around each other in an effort to slow the spread, mitigate COVID-19 so that life can go back to what it needs to be. And so we've been asked by the university to take a similar step. Obviously, since March, the organization has followed the tenets of this commitment to the letter. And so this is not a big leap for our organization, but symbolically, it's a big statement for the community. And so what we're saying is that the City of Williamsburg organization is going to follow these tenets and that we're encouraging our citizens to do the same.
Yes, had our monthly meeting with Catherine Rowe, as was just mentioned, and it was presented to us, and as Mr. Jones just, challenged the community to wear a mask, we felt like if we were to be able to participate in putting forward this resolution and taking a leadership role as a city organization, but then also getting our city businesses to join in on this, it's really in the best interest of everybody. So that's how it got to the agenda. So I hope that council will support it. Pat?
Yeah, no comments. I look forward to supporting it, and I agree. I think it's important for all of us to take that step and show that we're committed to, and again, making it a positive example for other communities.
Yeah, following up comments by Sam and Doug, and I know we've got partnerships, we've got partnerships with Colonial Williamsburg, we got partnership with the businesses and Tourism Council. In terms of this particular topic, between the city management and William and Mary, have there been those discussions yet with the other partners?
Well, certainly with Colonial Williamsburg, we've discussed this at length since March. I think we have a really great relationship, the three managers, if you will, the president of William and Mary and the president of Colonial Williamsburg. And rarely is there a week that goes by that we don't talk amongst ourselves, either together as a group or individually. And of course, COVID-19 is a major topic every time that we do get together in that way. In terms of the businesses, I don't know that there's an economic development organization, certainly not an economic development director and staff that has done as well a job in the region as Michele DeWitt and her staff have done communicating with the businesses since March. I think we do a good job of that normally, but since March, it's just been incredible. And so I think the answer is yes, we are.
And just to that point, I have, as liaison to the Business Council, I have a call tomorrow morning with Terry Benez and Julie Sums to just talk about a few things, and this will be one of the topics on the conversation on the agenda And I was going to bring it up yesterday at our EDA meeting, but it got canceled, so I'll follow up with Michele directly on that.
Anything similar to Doug on Tourism Council?
I haven't had any conversations with the folks at the Tourism Council, but certainly we'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
And just, I don't know if there's worth mentioning about, is it the HRPDC?
The Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, sure. So the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission leads a chief administrative officers group, operating group that consists of the entire region from Virginia Beach all the way up to New Kent. And so every month we get together. During COVID-19, we've been having conference calls. You know, back in March, it was 3 times a week. Yeah, I think 3 times. It's hard to keep up now without the progress, but it's slowly migrated down now to once a week we have this call. The purpose is to update on what's happening in response and generally. Obviously, the topics have sort of shifted as we've gone through it, and now we spend a lot of time talking about CARES Act money and how we're going to spend that, as well as responding to other community needs. But as part of that, we acknowledge that the mask wearing particularly is something that the region needs to push in order to help slow the spread in Hampton Roads, which, you know, I think the state has acknowledged that you know, we are seeing a case rise here that's not been shared in the rest of the state. And I think the common perception is that that's because we've been slow to adopt mask wearing in the way that a lot of places already have. So there is a campaign in the works that the HRPDC is developing with our PIOs across the region to try and push that regionally. And it includes some television spots. I think the mayor's already filmed a piece for Williamsburg. We've sent in some media that would be included in other spots, and a slogan's being developed, a catchy jingle I saw in an email. So I think it'll be interesting to see what that produces, and hopefully we'll get to see the product of that work sometime in September.
That's all I had.
Caleb, anything?
That's all.
Well, and I think, you know, in all of this, I think what we're trying to do is to get, particularly, you know, the community. I think the college is got, you know, the campus facility and their students, you know, pretty well managed through this. But the challenge still is what happens at local businesses. And when people go into, you know, the delis or go into a restaurant or a clothing store or the grocery store, is that we don't always see people adhering to the mask policy. And I think this commitment to, or signing on to this commitment, will begin to send the message that this is an important part of what we need to do to be healthy. And I applaud Ms. Ramsey's effort to take this to the Business Council so that hopefully they, if they haven't already, developed a program to communicate and educate local businesses on how to handle the situation of wearing masks and enforcing that policy, because it's ultimately in the business's best interest. I know it's hard to confront somebody and force them to wear the mask, but it's just, I think, a necessary evil, and I think we need to be more vigilant in seeing to it that you know, we're adhering to that policy. So, is there a motion?
I move that the City Council adopt Resolution 20-16 as drafted.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. So that takes us to item C, authorize the city manager to execute a 5-year license agreement with the William Mary Real Estate Foundation for the use of 26 parking spaces at 332 North Henry Street. Ms. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Today we're talking about the building just east of us at 332 North Henry Street, commonly referred to as a Health Evaluation Center when it was built. The William & Mary Real Estate Foundation owns this building, and they've entered into a lease with VCU Health Systems, which is really exciting to get that use downtown and more of that use in the city. So certainly William & Mary will be using that quite a bit, but it's also open to the public. So we encourage all our residents to look into that use. The property comes with 26 or 24 parking spaces, and those are the red indications on the map that you see adjacent to the building. This use requires more parking than that, so the foundation has asked for permission to purchase parking from us. They need 26 additional spaces. There are 11 surface spaces where the blue rectangles are located on the map. And we propose that those be signed and available for use by this building from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. the rest of the time, and on weekends and on July 4th, they would be available to the public as they are now. And then on the upper level of the parking terrace, 15 more spaces would be available at a first-come, first-served basis with hang tags that would allow the users to stay longer than the 2 hours. We currently have agreements with the other businesses that are around the parking terrace for them to use the parking terrace in this way. Staff is recommending that the health evaluation or the VCU health systems use be limited to the top of the parking terrace. The city has the capacity to do this. We have a prevailing rate because we already have agreements with existing businesses. It's $74.41 per space per month, and it has a 3% escalator that goes into effect every January. We're proposing that you authorize the city manager to enter into a 5-year license. The state code allows 5-year licenses for this type of use by cities, and we're requesting that action from you today. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Michele. Just one quick question. Would there be any conflict with the top deck interfering with any events that may take place at the community building?
At the community. So it will be 15 more cars arriving there. It will be first come, first served basis. So the weekend, those will just be weekdays.
Right, so that's what I thought. Most of the
6.
events at the community building are weekends, but I know, probably not now because of COVID, but I know in the past, other departments in the city use that for training or whatever, and it's been during the week, which it may complicate parking a little bit for them.
Yes, it will, so 15 spaces will probably be in use that are not currently in use there, and I'm trying to recall, is it 70 spaces? Is Aaron still here? I believe there's 70 spaces total on the second floor, but yes, there'll be 15 more cars there. So there'll be more usage than typical. I will say we did this analysis several years ago for a different prospect for this building, and they needed 60 additional spaces, and we felt we had that capacity as well. So this is much less than other uses we have entertained.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I support this. 2 questions, though, and you've answered part of one of them. So the hang tag, is it specific, just saying you can be on the upper deck?
Yes, sir.
So for that 2 hours plus?
Yes.
Yeah, my other question was, since this use that we're really expecting a lot of foot traffic, right? Yes. Is that why that difference between what the previous tenant wanted and what the new owner wants?
Exactly. That was the first question I asked them. Why is it only this many spaces? Because if you look at the square footage of that building, you would anticipate more than that. But no, they chose this building because of its proximity to campus, and their students can walk and ride their bicycles there.
Thank you.
I just have sort of a follow-up question as far as the hang tags would be for the second deck only, and if that deck is full, then they would have to find another place to park within the parking restrictions where they end up.
Yes, exactly.
And so they would have to know that the hang tag won't give them an extended time period if they parked in the library lot or along the street.
Exactly. And our existing agreements with the businesses who are there now is that exact same agreement. They know if they can't find a space there in the parking terrace, their hang tag does not excuse them from parking requirements around the rest of the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for providing us this information, Ms. DeWitt. Just one question. After the 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. time frame, are the cars, even with the first come, first serve hang tag, ticketed the same if it is 9 p.m. and they've been there long enough?
Yes. So once the 6 p.m. time frame goes away, they're under whatever the normal parking restrictions are for that area.
Okay. Yes. I just had a similar thought as events that might be held at night or something during the weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Michele, do you know by chance, are they going to relegate like the employees to park on the deck, or are the employees going to park by the building, or do they have a parking management plan for that?
When I spoke to them last week, they did not know yet which would be utilized. I believe it's employees for both uses, but I don't have a firm answer from them on that.
I don't have any other questions. Is there a motion?
So I move that City Council authorize the city manager to execute a 5-year license agreement with the William and Mary Real Estate Foundation for the use of 26 parking spaces adjacent to the property at 332 North Henry Street.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Takes us to agenda item D, an ordinance to amend section 2-3 of Article 1 of the Chapter 2 of the Williamsburg Code to include the juvenile and domestic relations courts in the fee schedule. Ms. Shelton.
And this is a correction from the ordinance that we brought last month. There were a couple of places where I failed to remove the word general, and thus it only applies to general district court in those instances. This ordinance simply removes those two instances where general is included, so it applies to both district courts, juvenile and general.
No discussion. Take a motion.
I move to approve proposed ordinance 20-12.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Agenda item E, amendment to lease agreement with Verizon Wireless. Mr. Small.
Mayor Pons, I'd also like to go ahead and just do the next item as well,
That'd be fine. So,
since they're both related.
Okay.
Before you today are two amendments to lease agreements that we hold with cellular companies on our Jamestown elevated tank. The first one from Verizon Wireless is an extension agreement, which would extend another second 20-year potential lease. It's actually 4 5-year terms with rent increases throughout. So that's just a renewal. The second is a lease agreement from AT&T, and that would be requesting just some housekeeping changes, mainly addresses and a few other minor things to the contract. And any questions on either one of those?
sir.
I have no questions, straightforward.
Maslin?
No question.
No questions?
All right. Is there a motion? And if perhaps we can read them both together. We can do them both together, Mr. Shelton.
I move that the City Council authorize the city manager to sign the amendment to extend the lease agreement with Selco Partnership DBA Verizon Wireless for another 20-year term. And I move that the City Council authorize the city manager to sign the amendment to the lease agreement with New Singular Wireless PCS LLC.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, that takes us to item G, approval of contract for work to include broadcast capabilities at the Stryker Center. Mr. Barham?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pons and members of the City Council. Before you today is a request to improve the broadcast capabilities in the Stryker Center. Currently, the only room that we can effectively broadcast meetings in Stryker is this room, the City Council chambers. There are numerous times where having the ability to broadcast meetings from either the large meeting room across the hall or the City Council workroom would be advantageous for us. Additionally, as part of this project, this will improve our remote meeting capabilities. It will improve the audio in the facility, provide easier access for the press to broadcast to their stations directly. It's kind of ironic that we had the press here earlier today. With these upgrades, we will also be able to route and control all of this from the current control room, which is right behind us here. This project will be fully funded using CARES Act money, and it will be procured via the state VETA contract. So the staff recommendation is that City Council authorize the city manager to sign a contract approving all necessary work to increase broadcasting capabilities in the large meeting room and the City Council room not to exceed $150,000. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Dent?
Thank you, Mr. Barham. I don't have any questions. I just know that even in the past, citizens had requested the budget work sessions and things like that to be broadcasted, and especially with the advent of COVID, this really increases the broadcasting capabilities that will be discontinue the transparency for the city. So thank you.
Question, we were lucky that Sam came in person, but originally he was going to be virtual.
Correct.
How's the best way to handle something like that?
So currently, and the reason why I think tried to convince Sam to do it in person is because you would have to call in, as we've all called in, or as you've called in before, and you hear kind of we call it the voice of God over this. In this case, you would have seen Sam up here on the screen as well as on these monitors, but Sam would have had a telephone up to his ear because we can't route all of that traffic from a remote meeting into the audio systems of the facility. This corrects all of that for not only this room, but the other two rooms as well.
Okay, thank you.
We also, periodically we're asked to host joint meetings between the city council and other bodies, and it can get quite crowded. Obviously, this room can't accommodate that, and so we have to do it in the large meeting room, and we end up with a single camera angle that we broadcast, which, really isn't up to the standards of the city of Williamsburg. And so this project, funded through CARES money, will give us the opportunity to install smart cameras like we have in this room that will make that a much more enjoyable viewing experience.
So I have no questions in favor of the use of CARES money to do this.
I have no questions either. I'm thrilled with the idea. I think we saw its necessity during the public hearing on the Confederate monument, and certainly promotes the idea that the city of Williamsburg as the colonial capital can be a wired place. I'd do it.
Well, as kind of the lone man left here on council that remembers the old Stryker and the planning process of going into this new building and facility, that goal, I think, was there to make sure that we had the state-of-the-art technology so that we could communicate with our citizens in the most effective way. So this I think, kind of closes that loop. So, thank you, Mr. Barham. Is there a motion?
So I move that City Council authorize the city manager to sign a contract to approve all necessary work to increase the broadcasting capabilities in the large meeting room and the City Council workroom in the Stryker Center not to exceed $150,000.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so that takes us to item H, which is a little different on our printed agenda than the one that's online, but they're all still on there. Consideration and authorization for an award of bid for the purchase of a mobile stage. I don't see Ms. Hutton here.
Yeah, I'm gonna tackle this one for you. So what we in the process of this project, this one's been a little bit complicated because this project started as an application to the Tourism Development Grant Review Committee, and the applicant was the library. In the process of evaluating that application, that committee recommended that they would fund the application request, but only if the city became the applicant and the owner of the stage that's requested. And the reason for that was because they felt like the city would be in a better position to make sure that the stage could be used by the community through a rental process. So we tasked that to Parks and Recreation, who began to price it out. So one of the reasons that we're here today is because in the process of that, we discovered that the quote that the library had, or the estimate of cost that the library had of $100,000 was not enough. Primarily because in order for us to do it as well as we need the stage to be as automated as it can be so that we don't have to dedicate a huge amount of staff to taking it somewhere and then setting it up, monitoring it while it's there, and then breaking it down. So we were going to ask you to give us a little bit more money today through CARES Act money because we see the stage as a way to promote outdoor events with limited attendance during the age of COVID. So we were going to try to get the additional funding on top of the grant that was already approved to accomplish the purchase that way. We initially thought that this was a sole source procurement, and so we were going to proceed with that avenue. But what we'd like to do today is postpone your action so that we can make sure it's a sole source procurement, and in the event that it's not, offer it out as a formal bid process. And we'll bring this back to you next month.
Okay. So we will table that or just table it till next month, or until staff is prepared to present the item to us. Okay, so then that takes us to item I, appointments to boards and commissions. Do we have any for today? Nope. Okay.
I thought we had one.
Yeah, we do
Yeah,
have one.
for some reason, Mayor, there's a duplication on
Yeah,
the
there's a
agenda.
duplication, so there's a second.
So,
J.
I or J,
Yes,
so
we do.
Yes.
item J, same thing. Do we have any appointments?
It looks like it.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Jim Penny, Colonial Community Criminal Justice Board.
So would you make that in the form of a motion?
Sure. I move that the City Council appoint James Penny to serve on the Colonial Community Criminal Justice Board for a term to expire on June 30th, 2023.
Second?
Aye.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Okay, so that takes us to the next item, which I have as open forum. So, is there anybody in the audience that'd like to come forward? Please state your name and your address, and keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Welcome, Dr. Cranville.
Hey, David Cranville, 201 Harrison Avenue. It's been very impressive being here for both Monday and Thursday, and thank several of you for responding, and I hope you all read what I sent out and you've seen what I've experienced, which is not very positive, as you can see. I start out with a sheet from the New York Times, July. As an American, we should all be as embarrassed as ever could be. We are at 10 times per capita in July the increase in the number of COVID cases. We can't go to Europe and Virginia, we can't go to New York. So, city manager, city council, we've really been an embarrassment to ourselves in what we call America. This is a war, and you all now understood, even though it's the 75th anniversary since we dropped the bomb to end a war, we have a very simple solution here, but it requires complete commitment by everybody actually doing something rather than talking or just passing stuff, resolutions. It requires that the solution is clear, wearing a mask and 6-foot distancing, with a lot of other details of washing your hands and if you're with your family, et cetera, et cetera. But we haven't done anything to enforce that. We haven't done anything to educate people. We haven't communicated this until right now. And that's why our schools can't open, and that's why they won't be able to open in the spring either. In fact, I don't even know for sure next fall if you really look at what people are saying. Pay attention and aren't just blind optimists. So, what I'm trying to say is, when you go into the community, and Doug, you were very open, and I'm not going to repeat your story, but you should share it with all four. It's a bloody failure. You go into a store, and some stores are very good, no mask, no service. This is what our governor's saying. And you don't have to have a Democratic governor to support this. You got a Republican governor in Ohio, so forget the party issue. It's that simple. And so we need to have stores put that sign in the front window. It's real simple, it's very clear, and it's the way our governor has described it. And then we need to train the employees and get the owners of the store to train the employees. So when I go into Ace, where I know these guys really well, and I spend a fortune there, well, not a fortune, but a lot of my time every weekend, you talk to the clerk making whatever they're making, and you need to help them understand that all they have to say is, I can't take your credit card if you're not wearing a mask. Many stores have masks at the front door, so we should be printing out masks and giving them away to every store so they have all the masks they could ever want. So we have the money to do that, obviously, with all the money we've talked about. So there's all kinds of little things we have to be doing. And the third thing we have to be doing is being proactive enforcement. That is, we actually are letting people know that if they're not wearing a mask, you know, it's really bad for everybody. And so we have to be rather forceful in this. And so, for example, is there any reason, Andrew, why we can't put signs on the tables out there on the Duke of Gloucester, you heard what Sam said. He was very unimpressed because there's zillions of people out there with no masks. And so why don't we put a sign? It doesn't matter if I have a beer and I sit in a defined area or it's too sunny, so I sit 10 feet away outside of the table next to the defined area. It's ridiculous. It's fine to put the sign up so we look right, but there should be a sign at least on those tables that says, wear a mask or be 6 feet apart. I mean, because that's what's supposed to happen outside. And we need to educate people and encourage them to actually follow this. And we need to do it in an aggressive, educating way, both for the owners, for their employees, and for all the people. Another example, what can happen, you've passed this resolution. I don't know what it says exactly. I don't even know what it means, except I know that the college is doing an excellent job. But does it clearly say that it's the policy of this city that everybody should be following the following guidelines? Have you actually adopted guidelines? I hope so. And if so, let's put it in the paper. Let's put it in the paper every day, Wednesday and Saturday. A big portion of the paper about wearing a mask and 6 foot distancing and so forth and so on. I mean, but make it clear, make it concise and whatever.
Dr.
So what
Cranbrook,
I'm,
thank you, and I think we're all committed to that, and I know we're all going to try to do more with the efforts at the Business Council to get into the businesses and have these conversations. It's going to be a slow process, but I think we're all committed.
but that's my point. It's been too blooming slow, and that's why the schools aren't open. That's why we're having an economic crisis.
Thank you,
And
Dr.
forget the fact that I'm 77 and I'm going to school and going to all these places and my life expectancy is 50-50 if I get the virus. We cannot go slow. So I suggest we put those signs up, and if you don't want to put them up, I'll put them up.
Thank you, sir.
And I want to make sure that you are putting this in the newspaper every Wednesday and Friday in the Gazette so people get the message. Because actually, we're a terrible failure for all the people who fought in the Second World War. And by the way, as you can see, at 150,000 plus dead already, 300,000 died in the Second World War in 5 years, and we're heading towards that number in 7 months.
Dr. Cranbrook,
It's
thank
terrible.
you. I appreciate your passion.
Well, I hope you guys are fired up now with actions as individuals and going into the store.
Cranbrook, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to come forward and speak? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
All right.
We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.